1, 2, 3. Γιάννη, μπορείς να ανοίξεις ένα PowerPoint τυχαίο? Γι' αυτό το κάναμε έτσι. Κάτω από εδώ. Αυτό δεν είναι αυτό. Ναι, δεν πειράζει. Σίγουρη, ναι, ωραία. Θα δούμε, είμαι κι εγώ.
Εγώ είμαι παράτερα, εδώ θα κοιτάω εκεί. Τι θα κάνω? Thank you very much. Γιατί θα πάω το ηλεκτροσόκ. Δεν μου μιλάει γκρικά.
Everyone understands. Just move this.
Καλησπέρα. Κύριε Πρόξενε, κύριε Κοσμήτορα, κυρία Πρεσλένοβα, κυρία Κωνσταντίνοβα, κυρία Ναξίδου, κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί φοιτητές και αγαπητές φοιτήτριες, σας καλωσορίζουμε στην ημερίδα που διοργανώνεται με την ευκαιρία της αναγόρευσης σε επίτιμο διδάκτορα της καθηγήτριας κυρίας Ρουμιάννα Πρεσλένοβα. Και η ημερίδα που θα αρχίσουμε ευθύς αμέσως, έχει ως τίτλο, θα το πω στα ελληνικά, ο βαλκανικός πολιτισμός στην εποχή της νεωτερικότητας. Παρακαλώ την κυρία Πρεσλένοβα να απευθύνει ένα σύντομο χαιρετισμό.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Varvonis, dear Professor Tsigaras, dear Professor Konstantinova, dear Professor Naxidou, dear students, welcome to our meeting. Welcome to our meeting entitled Balkan Culture in the Age of Modernity. Welcome everyone. We give the floor to our first speaker, Eleonora Naxidou.
Thank you very much. My presentation is about communist versus national interpretations of the past in modern Bulgaria. You have lived during both periods, communism and the current one. Which one is better? This question, posed to a professor at the New Bulgarian University of Sofia by one of her students who was born after 1989, encapsulates the main dilemma of the Bulgarian society concerning the evaluation of the recent past. More than 3 decades after the fall of the communist regime in 1989 and 15 years after the country's accession to the EU, the Bulgarians still take contradictory stances in terms of the recent communist history. In October, for example, in October 2012, a group of protesters entered the hall of the University of Sofia, where a conference dedicated to Lyudmila Zhivkova, daughter of the communist leader Todor Zhivkov, was about to start, and cancelled the event. Waving banners that stated Zhivkova is a communist, not a national leader, they claimed that the gathering was not an academic meeting, but an attempt to restore the reputation of the communist regime. This presentation examines the process of reassessing the communist past in 21st century Bulgaria, which is a significant issue that still stirs up Bulgarian society and affects all domains of public life. In this context, the reinterpretation of the communist past and the revision of the master narrative that contemporary historians have embarked on will be dealt with. Reconstructing the communist past. In 1989, the peaceful revolution, or Promiana, as it is commonly referred to in Bulgaria, brought about the collapse of the communist system of governance, and the country took decisive steps towards democratization and Europeanization. From the onset, the new democratic environment was conducive to heated public dialogue on the evaluation of the 45 years of communist rule and the reinterpretation of the historical past from the end of World War I. The communist version of history, which was meticulously built on Marxist principles and reviewed more than once according to the directives of the ruling party, was no longer plausible. The first to discredit it were liberal historians, intellectuals, politicians, and journalists. As one might expect, the main topics under discussion were the legitimacy of the communist rise to power and the role of the Soviet Union in this development. According to the official communist narrative, with slight variations in argumentation at certain times, all Bulgarian governments from 1923 to 1944 were characterized as fascist, with the exception of that of the National Coalition, 1931-34. Moreover, the 1941-44 regime was defined as being monarcho-fascist, fascist rule imposed by the monarch. The assertion regarding the fascist nature of the Bulgarian ruling elites was mainly based on their pre-war pro-German policies, which culminate in Bulgaria's accession to the Axis alliance. The decision to join the Axis was considered deliberate, and the declarations about neutrality hypocritical attempts to hide their real intentions. Initially, communist historians claimed that Bulgaria was under German occupation during World War II. This, however, was later revised, and Bulgaria was said to have been a German satellite with very limited autonomy. The communist narration asserted that the governments of the interwar period became unpopular and lost all credibility due to their fascist policies. As their conduct was traitorous and detrimental to national interests, it was only natural that reactions were provoked. Resistance took the form of an anti-fascist struggle, which, having begun as early as 1923, peaked during World War II, bringing the communists to power. The communists maintained that under their leadership, the vast majority of the Bulgarian people participated in this heroic fight against fascism, the only exception being the bourgeoisie. They also claimed that their epic victory against their fascist political opponents, which collaborated with the Nazis, was not only legitimized their rise to power, but also lent credence to their aspirations to rule forever. Anyone who opposed these views was considered unpatriotic and undemocratic. In this way, they justified the use of harsh punishment, which in the very beginning took the form of executions as a way of repressing political opposition and dissidents. The role of the Soviet Union in the 1944 political change was yet another important theme in Bulgarian communist historiography. The significance of Soviet assistance was clearly stated, however, in such a way that did not undermine the efforts of the Bulgarian people themselves. The victorious march of the Soviet army through the Balkans was considered to have had a major impact on the final defeat of monarcho-fascism and contributed decisively to the spread of communism in Bulgaria. At the same time, the Soviet protection of Bulgaria in the international fora was claimed to have averted a third national disaster, which would have entailed further loss of territories. The intervention on behalf of the Bulgarians was viewed as a second liberation, on a par with the Russian victory in 1877-78 against the Ottoman Empire, which had freed the Bulgarian lands and resulted to the creation of the Bulgarian nation-state. Revising the communist historical representation and revisiting the past was one of the urgent demands of Bulgarian society immediately after the 1989 changeover. The people's deep need to discover what actually took place at that time in history was evident throughout the public sphere. This was displayed in the form of mass rallies, reports in the mass media, memoir writing, etc. In addition, political speeches and parliamentary debates also pursued this trail of exposing the historical truth. In many cases, this inclination bore signs of retaliation, aiming to restore the reputation of those who had suffered victimization or degradation during communism. Within this climate, the communists adopted a defense position, staunchly adhering to their version of the past. They emphasized the positive aspects of the communist legacy, such as the contribution to Hitler's defeat. Historians associated with newly established NGOs undertook a more temperate reinterpretation of the communist interval. In this context, both ends of the spectrum, fascism at one end and the anti-fascist struggle at the other, came under consideration. The communist assertion that almost all the pre-1944 governments in Bulgaria had been fascist was now refuted. Instead, they were described as authoritarian regimes to a greater or lesser degree, which at times manifested sides of a fascist nature. In addition, the notion of monarcho-fascism was rejected. According to the new interpretation, although certain groups, organizations, and even political parties expressed fascist ideology, fascism did not actually ever seize power in Bulgaria. Moreover, the Tsar's decision to join the Axis when the war broke out was now considered more of a necessity dictated by the country's national interest rather than the outcome of his personal political sympathies and inclinations. At the same time, the significance of the anti-fascist struggle was re-examined. The question that arose was that if there was no German occupation and no fascist dictatorship, who did the partisans actually fight against? According to the new approach of the events, resistance was launched against the Bulgarian autocratic monarchy and its pro-German policies. In fact, it was asserted that the political changeover of September 9, 1944 was a military coup d'etat rather than a people's revolution. Despite the fact that the ruling elites had also gone beyond the law at certain times, the right of the partisans to take up armed action against the legal authorities was disputed. The legitimacy of the communists assuming power, an idea staunchly promoted for many years, was thus invalidated. As far as the Soviet Union was concerned, it was the positive impact and not the significance of its intervention that was challenged. For those opposed to communism, September 9 symbolized Soviet occupation, not liberation. Having led to the establishment of communist totalitarianism, it amounted to a third national catastrophe. And some concluding remarks. More than 3 decades after the fall of the communist regime, Bulgarians have not yet reconciled themselves with the recent past. Conflicting versions of the historical truth strive to prevail, making the construction of an official historical narrative very difficult. Lately, however, especially after accession to the EU, a growing number of Bulgarians have developed anti-communist sentiments and want a clean break from their communist past. This is also manifest in the recent discernible shrinkage in the Socialist Party's electoral base. However, pro-communist tendencies are not insignificant. These are to a certain extent due to nostalgia because of the low standards of life of many Bulgarians and the growing disappointment regarding the prospect of any future prosperity. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ την αγαπητή συνάδελφο την Νόρα Ταξίδου για την εμπεριστατωμένη και ιδιαίτερα μοντέρνα παρουσίαση και σειρά έχει καθηγήτρια της Βαλκανικής Ιστορίας του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών και του Κέντρου Θρακολογίας της Βουλγαρικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών, η κυρία Γιούρα Κωνσταντίνοβα, η οποία θα αναπτύξει το θέμα Dimitar Sismanov and the Greek-Bulgarian Societies.
Thank you, Professor Tsigaras. Παρακαλώ. Ωραία.
Όχι αυτό. Αυτό που είναι. Δεν ξέρω τι κάνουμε. If you want, I may start, and then...
Can you aim at us? Aim here, aim here. The present. Aim the presenter here.
Ah, here. Oh. Excuse me, I don't know how to deal with this problem. And ask them. It is a well-known fact that from the mid-19th century until 1964, the Bulgarian and the Greek politicians failed to reach political agreement on any issue. Moreover, they failed to sign a trade agreement or to negotiate the real linking on their countries. This situation was further complicated by the influx of refugees and resettlers forced by the sanguinary confrontation during the first 2 decades of the 20th century to leave their homes and seek a future within the borders of their own nation-state. It was only in the 1930s that an understanding began to creep in among the political elite of the two countries that some solution had to be found to the accumulated problems. The politicians of both countries were well aware that the negative stereotypes destroy the chances for political dialogue. Therefore, in the second half of the 1930s, they made attempts to change the public attitudes via cultural and economic initiatives. A great personal merit for the steps taken towards the mutual cognition of the elites of Bulgaria and Greece had Dmitry Shishmanov, Bulgarian ambassador in Athens in the period 1935-1940. He was graduate of the Faculty of Law of the University of Geneva, had an excellent command of several languages, and was actively engaged in creative work. Dmitry Shishmanov was the only child of Professor Ivan Shishmanov, a reputable Bulgarian scholar who already in his early works expressed the opinion that the ecumenical patriarchate did not pursue a Greek national policy, and the process of Hellenization of the Bulgarians were the result of the earlier development of the urban strata among the Greeks. Ivan Shishmanov expanded the source base of his research by including a huge number of Greek and Greek language sources in it, and refuted the romantic thesis about the negative role of Greek education and culture in the spiritual life of Bulgarians. The beginning of the Greek-Bulgarian rapprochement was set in May 1933, when a group of 12 Bulgarian members of parliament undertook a tourist trip to Athens to explore the possibilities of improving the economic relations between the two countries. The sportsmen of the two countries also took to action, and in March 1934, they arranged a football match between the two federations and then planned a football tournament for the Balkan Cup with the participation of the national teams of all Balkan countries. In the following years, trips were organized by tourist, women's, automobile, and pedagogical associations, societies, clubs, orchestras, etc. Without any doubt, however, the trip of Bulgarian intellectuals to Greece in November 1934, at the invitation of Alexandros Papanastasiou, had the greatest resonance. Actually, the 24-member delegation included not only representatives of the academia, but also artists, journalists, wards, industrials, architects, etc. They were received with great respect in Greece. The Athens press was of the unanimous opinion that this visit would help the two nations get to know each other and develop their political relations. An impressive speech was given by Professor Veselin Beshevliev, who spoke in beautiful modern Greek about the progress of Greece and invited Greek intellectuals to Bulgaria. The artist Sirac Skitnik said, "We know each other only as neighbors who have disputes. Our mission seeks to link intellectual Bulgaria with intellectual Greece in a relationship that we hope will bring about brilliant results for the politics of both countries in general." Another participant in the trip, the artist Boris Denev, described Greece as a distant, unknown, and alien country, but believed that it was the dream of every educated person to come to this heart of Asian culture. According to Professor Ivan Lazarov, director of the Academy of Arts in Sofia, all Bulgarian artists were captivated by Greece. I watched how they rejoiced in the southern sky, how they felt the transparency of the air, and how the strange coloring of this southern country made them as happy as children, wrote the professor, and continued. It was an indescribable rapture without any pause. It was truly intensive joy received through their artistic eye. In his view, this rapture, this joy, this excess of powerful expressions, this other nature of the landscape stirred the artist's creative world and found reflection in his paintings. The reason for this statement by Professor Lazarov was the exhibition Sketches and Impressions from Greece, displayed in 1935 in Sofia. In its 59 paintings, Sirac Skitnik, in his own words, shares his delight with Greece, which had made a strong impression to him. The artist shared this historical and artistic saturation of each piece of land creates a specific intrigue towards the landscape. It reveals to the fresh eye its legend and creative atmosphere. Sirac Skitnik himself described Greece as a lovely country, which we do not see or seek because of certain sentiments that have veiled the interest in it. The artist reminded to the Bulgarians that the closest wealth of antiquity for us is in our southern neighbor, and exclaimed, "To visit Hellas is to get an impulse to work." It was precisely the organizers and participants in this trip that became members of the established Greek-Bulgarian societies, whose aim was to bring about understanding and cooperation between the two peoples, and whose activities were perceived as auxiliary and parallel to those of the governments. The society in Athens was founded first in July 1935. Its chairman was Lucas Rufus, former foreign minister, and its members included the industrials, writers, journalists, etc. The Bulgarian ambassador in Athens, Dimitar Shishmanov, was honorary chairman of the society and insisted before his government that a reciprocal society be set up in Bulgaria. Thus, in December 1935, a Bulgarian Greek society was established in Sofia. Its first chairman was the diplomat Georgi Radev, a law graduate of the University of Athens, who resigned in 1937 for health reasons and was initially replaced by Professor Bogdan Filov and later by Dimitar Savov, head of the Chamber of Commerce. In May 1936, the Bulgarian branch of the society organized an exhibition of contemporary Greek art in Sofia. The exhibition of Greek artists and sculptures of the art group Umada Techni, headed by the sculptor Professor Antonius Sochus, was warmly received in Sofia and was visited by King Boris III, who gave awards to the artists. Critics in Bulgaria appreciated highly the exhibited works created by 15 artists from the group that played a leading role in the artistic life of Greece in the 1930s. The Greek exhibition in Sofia was, in a sense, a reciprocal gesture for the warm welcome of the Bulgarian horror Udina, which performed as a guest in Athens in April 1936. Its performances were described by Dmitry Shishmanov as a real triumph of Bulgarian culture and of the Bulgarian spirit, because they radically changed the opinion of many cultured Greeks about the spiritual level of the Bulgarians. One of the most intensive strands of activities of the Bulgarian and Greek societies were the mutual visits of their members. Noteworthy among these visits was the trip of a large Greek delegation from Athens and Thessaloniki to Sofia in May 1937, which was most solemnly received. The guests were taken on tours of the Bulgarian capital of Plovdiv and Gabrovo. Concerts were held in their honor. A conference was convened in the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Several receptions were organized, etc. The most representative trip of Bulgarian intellectuals to Greece took place in June 1940 in connection with the prepared exhibition of Bulgarian art. The highlight of the agenda was the exhibition of works of Bulgarian artists and sculptures opened by the King George II and the concerts of Bulgarian music in the Royal Theatre. All these activities were in full accordance with Dmitry Shishmanov's belief that with skillful conducted cultural propaganda, the reputation of Bulgaria can be at a much higher level. The diplomat actively worked towards this goal, and one of the lines of his activities was to strike a balance between the much better presentation of Greek literature in Bulgaria than that the Bulgarian literature in Greece. Indeed, Greek literature had been widespread in Bulgarian lands from the time of the Bulgarian national revival, when it influenced the development of Bulgarian literature. In the 19th century, there were quite a few poets who learned the art of poetry by translating the poems of well-known Greek authors. In the following years, the Bulgarian translators continued to follow the development of literature in Greece and quickly translated whatever they considered valuable. Translation of Bulgarian literature into Greek appeared considerably later. It was not until 1922 that Aleko Konstantinov's novel by Ganyu was published in Greece. In the 1930s, translations of Bulgarian authors increased significantly, and Dmitry Shishmanov was personally responsible for the promotion of the classic of Bulgarian literature, Jordan Yovkov, in Greece. In 1936, his Legends of Stara Planina, also known as Balkan Legends, were published in Athens and were highly prized by Kostis Palamas. On the occasion of the Bulgarian writer's death in 1938, the magazine Balkan Literature, Balkaniki Logotechnia, dedicated a special issue to him, which was received with great interest in Greece and, according to Shishmanov, was a real success for the memory of Yovkov and for the Bulgarian literature. Published in Athens in 1940, the anthology Contemporary Bulgarian Fiction Writers included 22 Bulgarian writers presented to the Greek reader with brief biographies and one short story each. Its introduction were written by Dmitry Shishmanov, who expressed his confidence that the publication would convince the Greek reader of the similar features of Bulgarians and Greeks due to their common historical fate and enable them to understand each other much better than usually believed. Dmitry Shishmanov did not fail to point out that although often underestimated, Bulgarian and Greek literatures were in nowhere inferior to Western literature, whose only advantage often lay solely in the fact
that it was written in a language spoken by hundreds of millions of people. The anthology also contained the only known Greek translation of a literary work by Dimitri Shishmanov, the story Paul the Icon Painter. Dimitri Shishmanov admitted that he came to love Greece because he found beauty in it, and claimed that it was indeed the thrill of beauty that distinguished his book Dreams Near the Acropolis, published in 1938 in Sofia. The book was described by the writer Boyan Bulgar as a huge window to the Greece of the past and of today, revealed not only as a fresco, but also as a soul. In Dreams Near the Acropolis, Dimitri Shishmanov depicted with a lot of fondness and wore high-profile topi for Greece, Athens, Sunion, Delphi, etc. In his reading, however, there were not merely proud remains of ancient Greece, but full-blooded and full of life places. In the text, ancient ruins were part and parcel of Greek cities, and mythical heroes coexisted side by side with the great contemporaries of Dimitri Shishmanov. Those present there included not only Agamemnon and Phidias, but his contemporary children dying for diseases, and Asia Minor refugees struggling for living. In this context also logically appeared the Bulgarian Stoyan, who read all day, every day, and amazed the Greeks by stating that the happiness was not in wealth. He was aware that he was labeled stubborn, chondrocephalus, and loaf, but he was in love with the married Arete. However, she refused to leave her house and the luxury lifestyle and go with him to Bulgaria. And this story seems to reflect both the writer's understanding and the differences between the two nations, his love and longing for Greece, and his inevitable adieu to it. They also reflect his failure to bring about a change in Bulgarian-Greek relations, despite the efforts he made to bring the two peoples together. This review has shown that Bulgarians and Greeks have got along quite well on personal and human level. The diplomats, however, failed to impose the culture of dialogue not only in the society, which remained closed in layered images and notions, but also in the political circles, which did not deviate from their firm strands. It is remarkable that no differences seem to be felt in the field of literature and art. The artists on both sides of the border obviously communicated wonderfully with each other, and with a little government support, really facilitated the better cognition of the two peoples, yet unfortunately, it was not they who took the fateful decisions for the nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Konstantinova, for this very informative and moving paper. And now we will hear the next presentation about rituals in Balkan folk culture from traditions to modernity. It is Professor Varvunis, our next speaker. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Now in rituals. Comparative folklore has long been concerned with the investigation of constituent elements, ritual and ritual performances common to the various folk cultures of the Balkans and in general to Southeastern Europe. The associated scholarly literature is consequently large, very detailed, and particularly interesting. As for Greece, there is, for example, the work of Professor Georgios Megas, together with a range of other comparative views and interpretations. Here and there, nationalistic tendencies may make their appearance, particularly in theories regarding origins, but despite this, all this work forms the basis for more recent views. Professor Walter Puchner has in recent times systematically examined the matter, using the theatrical aspect of ritual performances as a point of departure. He has systematically looked at the aspects of Balkan folk culture that present common features. Since, as a rule, his work deals with questions of comparative folklore, it has most certainly contributed to the Greek bibliography on the subject. Indeed, performative folk ritual performances and similar forms of folk theatre, they are tied to the ritual expression of metaphysical acceptance and questioning, appear throughout southeastern Europe, above all in Orthodox lands and secondarily in Catholic areas and Muslim communities too, in this fascinating area. Puchner studied forms of ritual performance involving action, that is, competitive and mimetic or ecstatic acts, and primary forms of folk theatre, which involve metamorphosis by means of masks, disguises, interactive behaviors, and theatrical roles. Thus, he comes back to the close study of folk ritual performances and the songs and speeches that go with them. He also returns to the matter of how they are to be integrated in the study of popular theatre in all the southeastern Europe. This is an area, as we have said, that offers communities and identities. I have stressed the importance of Walter Puchner's research and writings here because they form a contemporary and academically perfect example of the comparative study of common ritual elements in the traditional folk culture of the peoples of the Balkans, which makes use of the Greek and not Greek literature on the subject in exemplary fashion. Nevertheless, his studies of such material was probably reached its limits with Puchner's work, which concentrates and summarizes the preceding scholarly literature on the subject. Nevertheless, comparative research may still continue. In addition to phenomena of traditional culture, is also the rituals of contemporary folk culture of the Balkan people that present similarities on which there has not yet been any great work by folklorists or anthropologists. This group of phenomena is the result of the coexistence for centuries of the peoples of the Balkan as subjects of various multi-ethnic empires. Nor is it the result of the survival, regeneration, and reshaping of the ancient civilization elements that forms the cultures that older scholars investigated. Rather, it arises from the foundations common to all these peoples, constituted by orthodoxy and by orthodoxy's relations with Islam and its concerns traditional religious behavior. These phenomena are also most certainly the result of the prevalence or identical or similar conditions throughout the Balkans. The historical, economic, and social conditions that developed after the 80s in the Balkans, and in particular the development of tourism, with all the various financial, social, and cultural consequences that is brought with it, led to the formation of similar material conditions throughout the Balkans, on which, as is to be expected, a common cultural superstructure arose. As regards folk culture, one may observe once more the phenomenon of the present of features in today's folk culture, common to various Balkan people, particularly in regard to religious behavior and religious sensibility on the part of the common people on which we focus here. This current cultural change occurs fundamentally on three different levels. One of these concerns changes in concepts regarding the word and the shaping both of views regarding the word and the changes given rise to, and the formation of associated rituals. The second concerns the introduction of new of new cultural models and the ever-advancing urbanization, as it were, of Balkan folk cultures. The third concerns the adoption of various ways of handling other traditions which shape today's folk religious sensibilities and sense of religion in the Balkans. To take first changes in views of the world and the rituals whereby such views are generated and expressed. The common conditions that we have mentioned above are linked to the preeminence, even among the peoples of the Balkans, of the tendency towards secularization and desacralization. Furthermore, both secularization and desacralization are phenomena of cultural globalization, and the changes that it is bringing to traditional cultural systems to the Balkan and Greece. On the other hand, as regards the cultural influence of new technologies, scholars have discerned a tendency towards the introduction of new cultural models, which spread primarily among urban populations in the Balkans during the 90s, and then among rural populations in the area. These new cultural models, which generally emanate from Western Europe and the USA, are about to replace older cultural forms and older ritual displays. Thus, a culture of an urban type, as it were, is being exported to large cities and then to the countryside, which, as it is adopted, leads to the predominance of a new folk culture. Thus arises a cultural homogeneity, which forms the goal of cultural globalization. Finally, in regard to process connected with the management of cultural heritage, social media are fundamental to the formation of cultural systems in the Balkans. By means of this, the oldest cultural capital they possess is transformed as part of a process of flexivity, so that the dynamic culture process that tradition involves, which overwhelms and then shapes today's folk culture, continues to advance. We thus find ourselves confronting a new world of common cultural elements, which now exists and for historical reasons, nor have ancient cultural origins and that now survive, but because they are external influences that shape them. Many phenomena are common to all the people of the Balkans and are studied by various folklorists in these areas. Such phenomena are, for example, the secularization of older forms of religious ritual, the creation of new forms of ritual whose common feature is now spectacular they are, the folklorization of folk ritual advances and practices, and the creation of new forms of public ritual, of which the social aspect overrides the secularist and metaphysical. And it can certainly be seen that similar developments generally lead to similar cultural results, which are paralleled by similar developments elsewhere outside Southeastern Europe. This change is also the result of cultural globalization, which tends to group together cultural phenomena that occur in various populations, so that matters regarding the evolution of the various form cultures of Balkan people can be easily compared to similar developments and found in the traditional life of populations elsewhere in the world, a tendency which becomes clear if one looks at the considerable international bibliography on the subject. The appearance and spread of new forms of ritual in the Balkans, as is clear from our analysis, is the most basic manifestation of contemporary, modern, and postmodern folk cultures in the Balkans. This is the reality behind the shaping of traditional life and of the character, the structure, and the disguising features of the cultures of the Balkans. Thus, the study of such cultures, in which the discipline of folklore holds first and definitive place, is an important tool in the recording, study, and interpretation of the common contemporary cultural tradition of the peoples of Southeastern Europe, an area that has suffered greatly, but is of great significance too. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vervounis. After this interdisciplinary session, which dealt with politics, culture, and public rituals, and the very important issue of globalization in culture nowadays, we are moving on to the next session, which will be chaired by Professor Konstantinova and Professor Vervounis.
Please, the participants, to come here.
Our first speaker is Dr. Σταματία Φωτιάδου. Stamatia wrote her PhD in our department, the Department of History and Ethnology, and now is postdoc in Balkan history in the Institute of Balkan Studies and Center of Thrakology. Her paper has the title, The Balkan Wars, Reshaping Alliances, Reconstructing the Image of the National Other.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My presentation's title is The Balkan Wars, Reshaping Alliances, Reconstructing the Image of the National Other, and my research is focused on the Greek and Bulgarian national narratives and how both sides constructed the image of the national self and the national other during the Balkan Wars. However, in order to comprehend the reason why the nationalist rhetoric of both nations deviated during the Balkan Wars, I will attempt to highlight shortly the Greek-Bulgarian relations before the 20th century. So in this context, I think I have a problem. We all have a problem.
No.
Θα συνεχίσω έτσι. Είναι κάτι το οποίο μπορεί να επιληθεί τώρα ή να συνεχίσω χωρίς την παρουσίαση. 5 λεπτά. Τέλεια. So, in this context, from the early to the mid-19th century, Greeks and Bulgarians, being members of the multi-ethnic Orthodox millet of the Ottoman Empire, perceived each other as allies. However, the gradual formation of the Ottoman Empire to nation-states led to the emergence of the Greco-Bulgarian national conflict over the future territorial controls of Macedonia and Thrace, obliging both sides to reshape their national narratives with the aim to build up the picture of the Greek or the Bulgarian as the national other. So the conditions for a Greco-Bulgarian conflict had already been laid during the Balkan crisis of 1875, though they did not escalate into a full-scale armed conflict. The Russia-Turkish War in 1877, as well as Russia's victory over the Ottomans, culminated in the signing of the bilateral Treaty of San Stefano in 1878, which created greatly enlarged Bulgarian principality stretching from the Danube River to the Aegean coast and thwarted Greece's territorial expansion into the Ottoman provinces of Macedonia and Thrace. These developments provided solid ground to dispel the views and political approaches that promoted the notion of religious unity for both sides. Although the Treaty of San Stefano was never implemented, as it was superseded by the Treaty of Berlin, it was sufficient for Greeks and Bulgarians to develop the ideological construction of the vicious national other that tried to usurp Macedonia and Thrace. The research now was based on two main aspects. Firstly, it aimed to highlight the elements of national propaganda and the mechanisms of othering in the early 20th century, used to mobilize the public opinion in order to propagate the just cause against the Ottoman Empire, and secondly, to present how those elements were reconstructed so that the nationalistic narrative could justify why the Balkan states eventually turned again against each other. So in this context, the Balkan Wars are considered to be a fruitful period, not only to comprehend the vacillations between the Greek and Bulgarian nationalistic narratives, but also to grasp how Greeks and Bulgarians promoted these narratives and shaped and reshaped the stereotypes about their national enemy. The direct causes of the Balkan Wars could be traced to what Brubaker has defined as an ideological concept of nationalism as transborder or external national homelands nationalism, which demands the state's territorial expansion to include alleged co-nationals within the nation-state border. By all accounts, irredentism as the after effect of nationalism not only contributed decisively to the reorganization of the political space, but also determined the political agendas and national narratives of the Balkan nations and constructed the images of the national self and the national other. In this respect, the national narrative promoted the idea of the liberation of the oppressed brethren in order to justify the urge for territorial enlargement. The indirect causes of the Balkan Wars could be traced back to the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, the Young Turks' policy of Turkification, which threatened the Christian populations, contributed to the reapproachment of the Balkan nations. In this context, the Balkan states, instead of entering a lengthy and grueling negotiation process regarding the territorial distribution in the event of a victory, only to highlight the territorial disputes, formed the Balkan League against the Ottoman Empire with the aim of ending the Ottoman supremacy in southeastern Europe. Ipso facto, the Balkan Alliance necessitated revisiting the deeply rooted negative stereotypes addressing Greeks and Bulgarians in order to at least partially neutralize the image of the cunning enemy. On the eve of the Balkan Wars, the Greek and Bulgarian press made efforts to reshape the image and promote the positive features of their neighbor. By the same token, the depiction of the Greek and the Bulgarian as eternal enemies who threatened to curb the territorial expansion of one another had to be overshadowed and replaced by views that promoted the common interests between these two nations. The most effective way to fully reconstruct the hostile image of the national other was to expand the idea of the national self. In a sense, we can say that the press, which played a pivotal role in the shaping of the public opinion, began to change its content, moving from a nationalistic towards a more convenient perspective in which religion was the missing link between the two nations. In this respect, in the initial period of the hostilities, both sides followed a common path regarding the creation, the stereotypes of the national self, using the same features to distinguish their enemies and their allies. The news about the Balkan Alliance not only monopolized the newspaper headlines portraying the Balkan Union as a unique historical moment which would mark the beginning of a new era for the Balkan peoples, who for their part managed to put aside their differences so as to liberate the enslaved brethren, but was also used to construct an antithesis between the Balkan nations and the Ottoman Empire. Within this context, the alliance was depicted as a holy commitment among Christians, which did not emerge from the common political interest, but was based on common faith, solidarity, and the moral necessity to struggle against the Ottoman despotism. Additionally, the religious propaganda escalated during the first stage of the war with a view to waging holy war and presenting the two nations united against the barbarian Turks. Day to day, the Greek and Bulgarian newspapers compared the war against the Turks to a crusade in favor of civilization and progress, often likening themselves to David and the Turks' Goliath. The telegrams sent people notice of the accomplishments of the Balkan troops, which were illustrated as great victories of Christianity. From this point of view, it becomes apparent that Greeks and Bulgarians viewed the first stages of the Balkan Wars in the same light and developed a common propaganda argumentation. The image of the Turk as a decaying corpse and as a ferocious, cruel, and savage infidel on the one hand, and the image of the Greek or the Bulgarian as a fighter and a defender of justice and freedom on the other hand, were impressions that reflected the prevailing public opinion. In other words, up to this point, it is clear that both national narratives reinforced the religious purpose of the war, a strong indication of which is the plethora of articles written in the press, which conveniently displayed that rhetoric. However, the attempt of the Greek and the Bulgarian national narrative to use religion as a tool to justify the war as a Christian crusade and at the same time to present the Greco-Bulgarian alliance in a way in which the former negative stereotypes about the national enemy were overshadowed created a major problem in the process of legitimizing the Greek and the Bulgarian irredentism in the Arendim territory of the Ottoman provinces. It was at this point when the Greek and the Bulgarian narrative started adopting a different content approach in order to legitimize the territorial claims. So from this aspect, it gradually became obvious that as the Greek forces were moving on to the Ottoman Macedonia, and the Bulgarian military forces were about to besiege the eastern part of Thrace, the national rhetoric shifted its perception of undermining the religious nature of the war, whereas articles that propagated Macedonia as Greek or Bulgaria dominated the press. The Greek attack to the last line of the Ottoman defense for the city of Thessaloniki was a watershed in history, which resulted in the capture of the city by the Greek troops. This event led both national narratives to reconstruct their perspectives and mark the restoration of the irredentist rhetoric for Greeks and Bulgarians, illustrating once again the Greek or the Bulgarian as a national enemy. On the one hand, the Greek newspapers, motivated by the fact that the Greek troops marched to Thessaloniki earlier than the Bulgarian, took the initiative to present Greeks as the liberators of a city which was considered the cradle of the Greek civilization, while on the contrary, the Bulgarian newspapers claimed that the city was liberated from the Balkan League in an effort to minimize the Greek presence in the city. It is at this point that a sharp antithesis becomes apparent, one that led both sides to reproduce articles that addressed issues such as ancient history combined with ethnocultural superiority so as to accentuate the indisputable presumption of Greekness or the Bulgariness of Macedonian Thrace and challenge the other side's territorial claims as not existent. The Greeks highlighted that Macedonia was great Alexander's birthplace, whereas the Bulgarians invoked Kirill and Methodius in order to present Macedonia and especially Thessaloniki as the cradle of the Bulgarian civilization, respectively. Despite the efforts of the governmental narrative and of the pro-government newspapers to downgrade the negative stereotypes regarding the Greek or the Bulgarian allies by stating that the alliance among Greeks and Bulgaria was based on a solid ground, they could not reverse the tensions which had already risen in the society. Nonetheless, the propaganda of the Greek and Bulgarian newspapers did not remain restricted within the state's border. On the contrary, it came to the opponents' attention, responded to their arguments, and tried to deconstruct their nationalist narrative by accusing them of extreme chauvinism and revisionism. By this logic, the Greek newspapers, drawing information from the Bulgarian newspapers, claimed that Bulgarians were obviously dissatisfied with the fact that Greeks managed to invade Thessaloniki in a few hours earlier than they did, and as a result, they got the lion's shares without an effort. On top of that, it is worth mentioning that neither Greek nor Bulgarian public opinion had detailed knowledge of the treaty signed between Greece and Bulgaria. They were just speculating that both countries came to a fair territorial compromise. Furthermore, the national narrative of each side imagined that Macedonian and Thrace were consensually to be included in the future political space of Greece or Bulgaria respectively, while in reality Greece and Bulgaria signed an alliance without determining the territorial gains in case of a victorious outcome. The fall of Edirne, one of the largest cities of the Ottoman Empire, marked the end of the First Balkan War. As a result, the subsequent peace conference in London failed to find a peaceful division of the spoils. Romania's demands for territorial compensation as a reward for its neutrality led the great powers to put Bulgaria under intense diplomatic pressure in order to cede Dobruja. These developments made Bulgaria even more determined to hold on to as many of its gains as possible in Macedonia and Thrace. The Bulgarians argued that each belligerent nation should be compensated according to the effort they have made during war phase, which was a fair doctrine for Bulgarians since they had mobilized far more men and had much higher rate of casualties. The inter-allied war was soon to begin. It was to be shorter but far bloodier than the fighting against the Ottomans. The image of the Balkan Alliance, which was previously propagated as a historical miracle, had now turned into the monster of the 20th century. In general, the Greek and Bulgarian national propaganda kept on representing Greeks and Bulgarians as a nation with a larcenous character, accusing them of their insatiable greed for foreign lands. The two sides resorted to the same arguments, that is the renewal of the centuries-long struggle since the Middle Ages, and accused the opponents of committing atrocities and inflicting unspeakable cruelties to the civilian population. Taking all the above into account, one can conclude that the Balkan League had already started to disintegrate before the First Balkan War came to an end. The nationalist rhetoric restored rather quickly the familiar stereotypes of the national enemy and attempted to weaken the national sentiment and portray the Ottomans as the ultimate enemy of the nation. Feelings of distrust among the Balkan allies was prominent to such an extent that gave grounds to the press to misrepresent the war strategy of both sides, drawing that way confusing conclusions. For instance, Bulgarians failed to offer sufficient resistance in Chatalza to conquer Constantinople, which gave rise to claims from the Greek side that they deliberately called off the attack to the east in order to demand more territorial gains in Macedonia. Likewise, the Bulgarian newspapers claimed that Greeks had gathered their forces in Thessaloniki because they were plotting to unexpectedly attack the Bulgarian troops. All in all, both narratives invested in legitimizing their future national territory in Macedonia and Thrace, turning the First Balkan War into an early period of antagonism before the actual Greco-Bulgarian conflict, which was about to emerge a few months later. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Fogiado, for this very interesting and useful presentation about mutual images of Bulgarians and Greeks during the Balkan Wars. And now I will give the floor of my colleague, Elmira Vasilieva, Assistant Professor of Balkan History at the Institute of Balkan Studies and Center of Trachology, Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, to present a topic about the Bible House in Constantinople and the contribution of the Protestant missionaries to the progress of printing in the Ottoman Empire.
Thank you very much. Religious missions were one of the major features of Western Christianity. In comparison to the general Christian traditions, the American foreign mission enterprise was a late phenomenon, but it was a massive affair. This huge campaign was a result of the religious movement of the Second Great Awakening in the northeast of the USA and of the theology of postmillennialism prevailing in the American religious circles by the beginning of the 19th century, according to which Christians must clean and prepare mankind for the predicted in the Bible second coming of Christ. In the heydays of the American foreign religious missions, Protestant societies were active throughout the Balkans and in the Middle East. The representatives of the Congregational Church under the leadership of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions were the most influential among them. The beginning of the American Protestant missions in the Ottoman Empire was connected with the romantic desire to preach the gospel in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, having the long-term purpose to spread Christian truths among the Muslims. These attempts soon ended without success, and most of the efforts were directed towards the Christians of the Orient and their churches. Sympathizing to the Greek struggle for independence and hoping that new Greece would assist the resurgence of the Orient, the American board tried to operate there, but met the strong opposition of the Greek Orthodox Church and Greek nationalism. The Armenians in the Ottoman Empire responded far better to the Protestant message, and they became the main missionary field for the American board. By the middle of the 19th century, the American missionaries discovered the Bulgarians in the European provinces of the huge empire and had high hopes that a real ecclesiastic reformation would happen among them. By the end of the century, in a similar way, the Albanians were discovered and a mission among them was also organized. The Protestant missionaries aimed mainly at a rebirth of the true Christianity through a restoration of the vitality of the local churches, which were considered as the major reason for the widespread spiritual darkness and ignorance. But in time, they were convinced that the desired ecclesiastic reformation would not happen inside the existing churches and began to organize local Protestant congregations. Three were the aspects of the missionary approach of the Americans in the territories of the Ottoman Empire: the literary, the educational, and the evangelistic. In addition to this, there was also some social initiatives, medical care, and relief work. All these activities serve one sole purpose: conversion of the local population, and finally establishing self-sufficient Protestant communities comprising of natives. The educational initiatives had been from the beginning the most prominent part of the American activity, but the literary aspect was probably the most successful part of the Protestant propaganda for all missionary fields in the Ottoman Empire. Actually, publications occupied an essential part of the missionaries' work, aiming to popularize the evangelical truths by providing all nations access to the biblical texts. For this reason, one of the earliest enterprises of the American missionaries was the establishment in 1822 of a printing press in Malta. It was organized by Daniel Temple with an equipment of 3 presses and fonts of type in 7 languages from the Mediterranean region. Within a decade of existence, this press produced millions of pages of printing matters, enabling the scriptures, religious texts, and school books to be widely scattered throughout the Ottoman territories. By 1832, the publishing facilities were brought nearer to the center of missionary operations, being the Arabic equipment taken to Beirut, while the Greek, Turkish, and Armenian equipment was transferred to Smyrna. Smyrna became the new printing center of the mission, which by that time issued predominantly religious literature and school books in Greek, Armenian, Turkish, and Spanish Hebrew. Besides, the mission began to publish periodicals in Greek and in Armenian, which gradually became popular among the common people. The mission station in Smyrna contributed to the development of the 19th century Bulgarian literature too, by printing the translation of the New Testament made by Neofit in cooperation with the British and Foreign Bible Society, as well as some other moral and instructive books. The local Bulgarian teacher and tradesman Konstantin Fotinov published there the first Bulgarian periodical Ljuboslovje, modeled after the magazine of useful knowledge which the missionaries issued in Greek. Since 1846, an American printing house started to operate in Constantinople as well, publishing at first only Armenian books. In 1851, the mission succeeded to rent a building near to the Grand Bazaar in the city where they were permitted to sell Protestant books. It became evident that the Ottoman capital had many advantages. Thus, in 1853, the entire mission's printing equipment was transferred there. In 1859, a special building was occupied, which became known as the Bible House or the American Han. It soon became the main agency of the Protestant preaching efforts, defined as the arsenal which supplied all the mission stations with the two-edged sword of God's Word. The American Board's publications were supported by other Protestant organizations, such as the British and American Bible Societies, as well as various religious tract societies. The Bible House deployed its activity by continuing the work of the Smyrna Printing House and having several departments preparing publications in different languages. These departments were in charge of American specialists who, as a result of their huge missionary experience among the local peoples, had acquired the ability to understand the Oriental temperament and were able to translate religious messages or some progressive ideas in a suitable for the needs of the local readers' phone. These experienced missionaries were William Schoeffler, who had worked for many years among the Jews and the Muslims in the Ottoman capital, William Goodall, Harrison Dwight, and Edwin Bliss, who had devoted themselves to work among the Armenians, and the most prominent among them, the noted linguist Dr. Elias Rix, who was proficient in 12 languages, both modern and ancient. He successfully wrote, translated, and edited texts in Hebrew, Arabic, Greek, Turkish, Armenian, and Bulgarian. Actually, one of the factors for the success of the mission's publication activity was the fact that there were such intellectuals, well-educated and gifted. In order to guarantee quality of the translations, local men of letters were also employed, assisting the Americans. In the second half of the 19th century, the American Mission's Printing House published predominantly books in Armenian, Armeno-Turkish, Greco-Turkish or Karamanli, Bulgarian, Greek, and Ottoman Turkish. During the 80s and 90s, in the Bible House published publications in Arabic, Persian, French, Italian, Serbian, Wallachian, and Albanian were also offered. The most important work of the Protestant Printing House was still publication and distribution of the Bible in the various languages spoken within the empire. The existing translations were edited and republished, and in the same time new translations were prepared. In 1862, Dr. Goodall completed his Bible in Armeno-Turkish. In the same time, Dr. Rix began his translation of the Bible in modern Bulgarian, which was finished in 1871. In 1862, permission was given for publication of books in Ottoman Turkish, and as a result, William Schoeffler commenced the translation of the Bible, which was continued later by George Herrick and Elias Rix, and successfully completed in 1878. In addition to this entire translation, separate excerpts from the Bible in the local languages were published, as well as popular Protestant texts, hymns, and religious brochures, and some moral and instructive texts. The production of the Bible House diversified more and more in time. Beside the religious texts, there were also school books and grammars, dictionaries, and practical handbooks for studying different languages. The purpose of these training aids was not only to achieve some religious results, but to contribute to the spread of a wider cultural influence. For example, in the 1860s, English-Turkish grammars, dictionaries, and spelling books were published in order to bring English language and ideas to the Ottoman mind, which was otherwise being drawn to the French. School books in geography and mathematics were also prepared, as well as volumes of literature and history, while by the end of the 19th century, there were also books on science and medicine. Looking for more opportunities to preach the gospel in front of a wider audience, the missionaries made quite an effort to publish newspapers and periodicals. These Protestant periodicals were distinguished for their quality and were sold on a very reasonable price, and as a result, they were sought and appreciated by many. Their influence and significance was far bigger than previously anticipated purely mission results. The Americans reported as a huge success the publication of a monthly magazine and a weekly newspaper called Δ.Π.Θ in 3 languages. In Armenian since 1855, Armeno-Turkish since 1860, and Greco-Turkish since 1872, which subscribers increased with every year. No less important were the similar Bulgarian periodicals under the name Zurnitsa, a magazine since 1865 and a newspaper since 1876. A distinctive feature of these missionary periodicals was that they managed to attract a wide range of readers. It was mainly due to the diverse content in which religious topics were far from being the only ones. The priority objective of the Zurnitsa's editors, for example, was to deliver some missionary results by cultivating Protestant virtues within Bulgarian society. All efforts were directed at the education of people, believing that through the medium of acquired knowledge, Protestant ideas would spontaneously penetrate their minds. This enlightenment should have not been only spiritual, but also practical, bringing changes in the native people's way of life. Thus, often were included articles concerning moral and domestic issues, as well as practical advices for providing better living conditions according to the attainments and requirements of the contemporary Western world. For example, instructions for observance of personal and family hygiene were published, as well as some advices for the relationship between spouses and for bringing up children. In order to overcome the backwardness of the local people, articles of popular science were also provided, giving simple explanations of natural laws and phenomena, the contemporary technical developments, and all kinds of innovations, descriptions of the human body structure, the specifications of various diseases, etc. This publication directed both at the Enlightenment and at opening the readers' minds to the Western civilization. The weekly newspaper, in spite of having some religious articles, was very secular. It provided information for mundane affairs in a special news section, covering both local and international news. According to the missionaries, their aim was to present, together with valuable information, much Christian truths. And it was a strategy to widen their readership. Thus, the Bulgarian Zurnitsa, as well as the Armenian Δ.Π.Θ, enjoyed great popularity, not only in the Protestant congregations, being prized as qualified sources of information. That is why these periodicals were considered the greatest success of the American Protestant mission, having done missionary work where no other agency could do it, entering hundreds of homes which no Protestant could enter. The books, tracts, school books, training aids, and periodicals published in the Bible House in Constantinople were distributed in the vast territories of the Ottoman Empire and even beyond them. The mission had special bookstores in some towns, but more important to the spread of this literature were the missionaries, who, while touring in their fields, had always a good stock of the mission publications, as well as the so-called colporteurs, who were employed by the mission with the purpose to travel and sell books. They became important agents of the Protestant propaganda, who were invited and expected in many places because of the books, but they used every opportunity to preach. The number of books published in the Bible House in Constantinople was huge. In the 1870s and 80s was the time of the greatest prosperity, when each year were produced around 100,000 volumes. Actually, this huge publication activity of the American missionaries came in response to the existing want of literature in native languages. The missionaries were very encouraged by the reports that many Bulgarian peasants had bought the New Testament, knowing not a letter from the alphabet, but believing that their children would learn to read. The Americans believed that such faith could move mountains, and it definitely predetermined the comparative success of the Protestant mission in this aspect. But there were difficulties too. The Protestant publications met the strong opposition of the Orthodox clergy, which made everything possible to prevent the spread of the missionary literature and to protect their flock from this foreign influence. Besides, the relations with the Ottoman authorities not always went smoothly, and there were periods with some official limitations to the publication activities and a strong censorship. Nevertheless, the Bible House continued to be very productive for decades. Its production diminished only in the 1890s, but it was due to the financial constraints the American Protestant mission suffered in that period. Unfortunately, the Bible House full publishing capacity had never been restored after that, and even though it continued to operate until the First World War, it was far from its golden times. The significance of the American missionary publications in the 19th century Ottoman Empire was undoubtedly considerable. It may be said in general that they created a literature in every language in the Near East, which fell within the field of their labors, and contributed a lot for the progress of printing in the region. It is not without reason to claim that, along with several other publishing houses, usually run by non-Muslims, the Protestants had an important place in bringing the Gutenberg epoch to the Ottoman Empire. It should be noted that both contemporaries and modern scholars unanimously praised American missionaries' literary activity as something positive for the cultural development of the peoples who they worked among. Despite the fact that the natives prefer more secular publication and that the printing press, this otherwise powerful implement that missionaries had, did not lead to huge proselytizing achievements, the Americans were proud that with their work providing literature in the spoken languages, they were partly responsible for the intellectual advancement of the local people. It was assumed as an important step in the right direction because education was considered a higher value and a necessary condition for real and conscious religious reform that would naturally follow. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Vassilieva, for her very informative presentation about the activities of the missionaries in the Ottoman Empire. And now I'll give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Alexandra Milanova, and to present her very interesting topic about the Western art music tradition in northern Greece. Dr. Milanova?
Okay, doesn't matter. Thank you, Professor Konstantinova. The development of music culture in northern Greece until the First World War holds a rather negligible place in musicology, superseded by the classical music scenes of Athens and the Ionian Islands. Before the establishment of the Conservatory of Music in Thessaloniki in 1914, the population of Aegean Macedonia had rare opportunities to encounter and experience the European art music tradition and had no access to Western-type music education. Before the First World War, mainly wind bands as well as mandolin ensembles and choirs shaped local musical life. They also provided the musical component of religious and cultural events organized across the city. In addition to those were the occasional musical initiatives of the inhabitants of Thessaloniki, which found expression in the establishment of various musical associations. Among them were the Society of Music Lovers, founded in 1889, the Amateurs Club, established in 1892, the Orpheus, founded in 1904, and many others. Those organizations usually had amateur philharmonic orchestras, as well as mandolin and choral ensembles that supported and enriched the local musical life. The repertoire which the ensembles performed in various venues, including restaurants, cafes, and hotels, consisted of two main types of musical works. The largest share was popular music intended for a wide audience, created and performed by Eastern musicians or groups. Another, albeit smaller part of the repertoire, consisted of Western European musical fragments favored by the ever-growing middle class. Those composers who challenged the dominant cultural practices of the period by composing art music themselves, entering a previously Western musical domain, have usually been marginalized. Some of them were later idealized and were given the status of quote-unquote distinguished national composers. The D'P.Th orphanage played an important role in the development of instrumental music in Thessaloniki at the beginning of the 20th century. Since its foundation in 1903, music disciplines have been introduced with a particular focus on playing various musical instruments. Soon, the orphanage formed its own philharmonic orchestras, which participated in all major events in Thessaloniki. Over time, the number of musical institutions in the city increased. In 1911, Sotiris Grekus established the first private conservatory of music in Thessaloniki, the so-called Conservatory of Grekus. The violin and piano classes, originally led by the Italians Tiberio and Marchesini, led a central place in the education. 3 years later, according to decree number 349 of November 5, 1914, the Thessaloniki Conservatory of Music was established. The initiative belonged to Eleftherios Venizelos, who personally invited the director from Brussels to take over the leadership of the educational institution. The intentions of the Greek Prime Minister related to the role of the Thessaloniki Conservatory of Music were quickly realized. Through most of the 20th century, it remained the main music educational institution in the city, thanks to which the population of northern Greece encountered the European musical tradition. The main tasks of the Conservatory of Music were to teach according to the Western model, to promote European music, and to support the development of Greek instrumental, chamber, and symphonic music. In order to achieve these goals, the Conservatory attracted distinguished Greek musicians who received their education abroad, such as Vasilios Theophanous, Euripides Koutsanidis, and others, as well as a number of foreigners, among whom was the Belgian Theo Kaufmann. Central figures in the cultural life of Thessaloniki and the entire region, with significant contributions to the development of Greek music during this period, were Dimitrios Lalas and his student Emilios Riadis, whose birth name was in fact Emilius Hu. He was the son of the chemist and pharmacist Heinrich Hu from Silesia and the Greek Anastasia Grigoriou Nini. From an early age, Emilius wrote poems under the pseudonym Emilius K. Eleftheriadis. He used his mother's patronymic, which he shortened to Riadis during his stay in Paris in the period from 1910 to 1915. The pseudonym was later adopted by the Greek government as his official name in the belief that it was more appropriate for an artist. Emilios Riadis turns out to be one of the most enigmatic figures in the musical life of Greece, since only a very small part of his works have been studied by the Greek musicologists. Most of his compositions remain unknown, unpublished, and unperformed, and therefore unknown to the public. Only in recent years, Emilios Riadis and Dimitrios Lalas have been recognized as the first significant musical figures from northern Greece who actively created and promoted modern European music. The essential role in permeating French and German aesthetics and style in the context of the westernization of Greek music culture is evident in both the work and the professional development of the two composers. In the past, Lalas and Riadis' artistic activities and achievements have been overshadowed by the fame of other composers, who has been widely appraised as the first important composers of modern Greece. However, unlike them, Dimitrios Lalas got the unique opportunity to work and learn from Richard Wagner. Due to Lalas' collaboration with Wagner during the 1876 Nibelungen production in Bayreuth, as well as his teaching of German lied to middle-class students at the Supreme Girls' School of Thessaloniki, researchers usually portrayed him as Wagner's student, assistant, and epigon. Accordingly, in Didier biography of his brother, the Greek-American actor Raoul Aslan, Lalas is mentioned as, quote, a copier of Richard Wagner, who is a fervent supporter of this postmodern trend and instills in the soul of his female students a pure enthusiasm for his beloved teacher, but also for the German romantics Schubert and Schumann, unquote. In Greek radio broadcasts of the early 1980s, Lalas repeatedly appeared as, quote-unquote, student and copier of Wagner. According to some Greek scholars, Lalas' Western orientation ushered in a new era in the musical history of Thessaloniki. Quote, the first serious expression of creating a musical school is to be noted with the unexpected arrival and settlement in Thessaloniki of a student of Wagner's, Dimitrios Lalas, unquote. Other authors arrived at the conclusions that, quote, Lalas was indeed a great musician, a pupil of the great Wagner who has left ample works of great value, unquote. He was the first Greek composer directly influenced by German Romanticism. It should be noted here that Lalas' contemporary, Dimitrios Lalios of Patras, was also under the impact of those ideas. He received his musical education in Munich, where he studied with the remarkable Austrian composer and pedagogue Ludwig Thuile. One of the most brilliant pieces of music composed by Lalios was the symphonic work Midnight Sleep in the South. It was written in 1891 and bears the features of Richard Wagner's music. The expected Wagnerian dominance, as well as some elements that refer to late Mahler, are easily detected in the 12 surviving choral songs of Lalas. His characteristic choral language that he owes to both Wagner and the professor at the Royal Bavarian Music School in Munich, Josef Reinberger, with whom he had studied in 1872, may be illustrated best in a short analysis of his choral work, The Charterhouse, of the early 1870s. Apart from the strong presence of Romanticism, another significant Wagnerian element in the music piece is the dramatic confrontation between two choirs, one of which sings the words of the poet, and the second one, which consists of the monks, is being heard from afar. In the other compositions of Lalas, such romantic influences combine with orchestrations that evoke the spirit of Greece and patriotic images of a new Macedonia set free from the Ottoman control. This applies in particular to his orchestral work entitled The Macedonian Paean, the score of which seems to be irretrievably lost either in the archives of the Greek military bands or in private possessions. Before the band of the Athens Palace Guard performed the piece on the 21st of February 1907, Philippos Dragoumis, who was present at the rehearsal the day before, heard it and described it in his diary. Impressed by the mastery of the Greek composer, he wrote, quote, "Lalas was definitely a student of Wagner and an admirer of Beethoven," unquote. As Lala's harmony and piano student, Emilius Riadis irreversibly felt under the same Western European influences. Wishing to escape the mandatory military service in the Ottoman army during the Young Turk regime in the summer of 1908, Riadis went to study abroad. From September 1908 to July 1910, he studied at the Royal Academy of Music in Munich. He attended music analysis and field classes led by Anton Bier-Waubrunn, as well as piano and choral music. Some scholars even argue that Emilius Riadis was a pupil of the remarkable maestro Felix Mottl, one of the greatest conductors of the late 19th and early 20th century. Documentary evidence to support this hypothesis, however, has not been found. After his stay in Munich, Riadis moved to Paris, where he lived until 1915. The available information about this 5-year period of his life is sketchy, rather vague, and almost impossible to confirm. The most debated question is whether Riadis was actually a student of the outstanding individuals whose names are mentioned in his biographies, namely Gustave Charpentier, Claude Debussy, and Joseph Maurice Ravel. A close friend of the Greek artist first published this information in an article in the local press. It is very likely that after his return to his homeland in 1915, Riadis spread those rumors himself in an attempt to build a myth around his personality to enhance the significance of his stay abroad and thus to attract public attention. Greek musicologists investigated this issue and concluded that the Greek composer has never attended the classes of Charpentier nor Ravel, but he has received advice from them. They argue that this can be no doubt about Riadis' admiration of Ravel works, especially of his piano pieces, but there is insignificant evidence of any personal contact between the two. Although he did not study under the aforementioned French composers, Riadis' work was undoubtedly influenced by their music. Moreover, his Macedonian songs, Chansons Macédoniennes, were first published in Paris. This was just before the outbreak of the First World War, when the French publishing market was flourishing, including in the field of classical music. The compositions were met with great enthusiasm by the public, and critics stressed their quote-unquote emotional charm and power. In France, as well in Greece, Riadis became known above all for his songs, more than 200, which constitutes the largest and most complete part of his archive preserved to this day. The main reason for the Greek composer's great success is that his work is similar to the masterpieces of the French Impressionists, from whom he was strongly influenced, and above all by Ravel. Even though Dimitrios Lalas and Emilius Riadis were well appraised in the domestic and foreign press, during their lifetime, their own music has been mainly known to an artistic elite rather than to broader audiences. Both composers received recognitions only after their deaths. Regardless of the reasons for their very limited popularity in their lifetime, Dimitrios Lalas and Emilios Riadis deserve to be discussed alongside other distinguished Greek composers who emulated the Western musical tradition, created works in this style, and thus stimulated the penetration of Western European instrumental, chamber, and symphonic music into the Greek society. This is the reason why the world-famous American musicologist and music critic Jim Sampson put their works on a par with the achievements of the most important and world-famous composers of the early 20th century. Thank you very much for your resilience.
Ωραία, ευχαριστούμε και εμείς. Ευχαριστούμε όλους όσους πήραν μέρος στην συνάντηση αυτή. Δεν θα κάνουμε συζήτηση, παρότι βλέπω ότι υπάρχει πάρα πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον για συζήτηση από το κοινό. Παρ' όλα αυτά δεν θα κάνουμε συζήτηση, διότι πρέπει να ετοιμάσουμε και την αίθουσα για την αναγόρευση η οποία ακολουθεί. Οπότε νομίζω ότι μπορείτε να περάσετε έξω, να ετοιμάσουμε την αίθουσα και να εισέλθετε πάλι. Όπως λένε στα κογκλάβια, extra omnes.
σε ένα, σε ένα, σε ένα.
Έναρξη τελετής. Παρακαλείται ο κοσμήτορας της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών, καθηγητής κύριος Εμμανουήλ Βαρβούνης, να προσφωνήσει την τιμόμενη.
The Dean of the School of Classics and Humanities, Professor Emmanuel Varvounis, is kindly requested to address a welcome speech.
Πανουσιολογιότατε εκπρόσωπε του Σεβασμιωτάτου Μητροπολίτου Μαρονίας και Κομοτηνής, κύριο Παντελεήμονος, κύριε Πρόξενε, κύριε Πρόεδρε του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί φοιτητές και φοιτήτριες, κυρία Πρεσλένοβα, κύριε συνάδελφοι. Είναι ιδιαίτερη η χαρά μου και ξεχωριστή η τιμή που αισθάνομαι σήμερα, καθώς ως κοσμήτορας της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών του Πανεπιστημίου μας, υποδέχομαι στην ακαδημαϊκή μας οικογένεια την καθηγήτρια Ρουμιάνα Ηλίεβα Πρεσλένοβα, επιφανή επιστήμονα και ερευνήτρια από τη φίλη και γειτονική Βουλγαρία, η οποία αναγορεύεται επίτιμη διδάκτορ του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας της σχολής μας, μετά από ομόφωνη πρόταση του τμήματος και σχετική απόφαση της συγκλήτου του Δημοκρατίου Πανεπιστημίου Θράκης. Σταθερά προσανατολισμένη στην ανάπτυξη ενός επιστημονικού ακαδημαϊκού δικτύου στον ευρύτερο χώρο της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης και της Μέσης Ανατολής, η σχολή μας είναι δια των 3 τμήματων της πρωταγωνίστρια σε αυτό και έχει ήδη συνομολογήσει σειρά επιστημονικών συμφωνιών και πρωτοκόλων ή συμφώνων συνεργασίας με τα εγκυρότερα ερευνητικά και ακαδημαϊκά ιδρύματα των Βαλκανίων. Συμφωνίες ενεργές, στα πλαίσια των οποίων διοργανώνονται συγκεκριμένες δράσεις, οι οποίες αφενός μεν εδραιώνουν την εξέχουσα εξωστρέφειά μας, αφετέρου δε συναποτελούν μαζί με άλλα ασφαλώς δεδομένα το επιστημονικό πρόσωπο, τον ακαδημαϊκό χαρακτήρα και την ερευνητική ιδιοπροσωπία της σχολής μας. Στο πλαίσιο αυτό, η συνεργασία μας με την τιμόμενη απόψε καθηγήτρια, τα βιογραφικά στοιχεία της οποίας θα τα ακούσετε στη συνέχεια στον ενομισμένο έπαινο, την Λαουντάτιο, την οποία θα εκφωνήσει η συνάδελφος η κυρία Ναξίδου, η οποία είχε και την πρωτοβουλία. Τα βιογραφικά λοιπόν στοιχεία θα τα ακούσετε στη συνέχεια. Ωστόσο, η συνεργασία μας με την κυρία Πρεσλένοβα υπερβαίνει τα στοιχεία αυτά και έχει ιδιαίτερη θέση σε αυτό το πλαίσιο το οποίο σας περιέγραψα προηγουμένως. Και τούτο επειδή ως Διευθύντρια του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών και του Κέντρου της Θρακολογίας της Βουλγαρικής Ακαδημίας των Επιστημών, έχει πάρει μέρος και έχει οργανώσει σειρά επιστημονικών ερευνητικών προγραμμάτων, έχει δημοσιεύσει πλήθος εργασιών και έχει αναπτύξει στενές σχέσεις με πανεπιστημιακά ιδρύματα και ερευνητικά κέντρα του δυτικοευρωπαϊκού χώρου, ιδίως δε των γερμανόφωνων πρωτίστως και των αγγλόφωνων δευτερευόντως περιοχών στην Πράγα, τη Βουδαπέστη, τη Βιέννη, το Λονδίνο, το Μόναχο, το Βερολίνο, το Γκράτς. Οι πολλές και σημαντικές δημοσιεύσεις της, οι επιμέλειες επιστημονικών συλλογικών τόμων, η συμμετοχή της σε πλέον από 60 επιστημονικά συνέδρια και η θέση της στο Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο της εφήμως γνωστής Association Internationale d'études Sud-Est Européenne καταδεικνύουν του λόγου το αληθές. Είναι λοιπόν τιμή όχι μόνο για την ίδια, αλλά και για μας η απόψινή της αναγόρευση σε επίτιμη διδάκτορα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας της σχολής μας. Και βέβαια πέρα από το συμβολικό βάρος και το τελετουργικό σκέλος της απόφασης για την απονομή στην κυρία Πρεσλένοβα της ύψης της αυτής ακαδημαϊκής διάκρισης, πρόκειται για μια ακόμη ευκαιρία περαιτέρω σύσφυξης των ακαδημαϊκών, ερευνητικών και εν γέννη επιστημονικών σχέσεών μας με προβεβλημένους και επιφανείς επιστήμονες γειτονικών λαών, ώστε σε συνέργεια μαζί τους να προωθήσουμε όχι μόνο την έρευνα της ιστορίας και του πολιτισμού, αλλά και την αλληλοκατανόηση και συνεργασία των βαλκανικών λαών εκατέρωθεν των συνόρων, πολλό μάλλον καθώς με τους Βούλγαρους γείτονές μας ανήκουμε πλέον όχι μόνο στην ευρύτερη βαλκανική, αλλά ιδιαίτερα και στην ευρωπαϊκή οικογένεια. Με τις σκέψεις αυτές, που εν πολλοίς παρουσιάζουν και το ουσιαστικό σκεπτικό της απόφασης για την ένταξη της καθηγήτριας Ρουμιάνα Ηλίεβα Πρεσλένοβα ως επίτιμου μέλους στην ακαδημαϊκή οικογένεια του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας και δι' αυτού της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών, σας καλωσορίζω και πάλι, κυρία συνάδελφε, και σας εύχομαι υγεία απερικλόνητη, πνευματική δύναμη και ερευνητικός φρίγος, ώστε ως άλκημος αθλήτρια του πνεύματος και της επιστήμης να διακρίνεστε πάντοτε στο στίβο των ακαδημαϊκών επιδόσεων. Ως ευπαρέστη.
As the Dean of the School of Classics and Humanities of our university, it is with a feeling of great happiness to have the distinct honor and privilege of welcoming to our academic family Professor Lumiana Ilieva Preslenova, who is here awarded an honorary doctorate degree from the Department of History and Ethnology of our school, following the unanimous proposal of the department and decision of the Senate of the Democratic University of Thrace. Soundly oriented to the development of a scientific academic network in the wider area of Southeastern Europe and the Middle East, our school, through its 3 departments, has to date concluded a series of scientific agreements and protocols and/or cooperation agreements with the most respected research and academic institutions in the Balkans. Active agreements within whose framework specific actions have been organized, which on the one hand establish our outstanding commitment to a high level of openness, and on the other, of course, together with other facts, constitute the scientific role, the academic quality, and the acknowledged research identity of our school. Within this context, the successful collaboration our school has had over the years with a professor who is being honored here tonight, and whose biographical information you will shortly be informed of, holds a special place. And this is due to the fact that, as the director of the Institute of Balkan Studies and the Center of Thrakology of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, Professor Preslenova has participated and organized a number of scientific research programs, published numerous works, and has developed close relations with university institutions and research centers in Western European countries, primarily in the German-speaking and secondarily English-speaking regions, which include Prague, Budapest, Vienna, London, Munich, Berlin, and Graz. Her many and significant publications, the editing of scientific collective volumes, her participation in over 60 scientific conferences, and her position on the board of directors of the well-known Association Internationale d'études du Européen demonstrate this fact, which speaks for themselves. Therefore, tonight's conferment of an honorary doctorate degree from the Department of History and Ethnology of our School of Classes and Humanities is not only an honor for Professor Preslenova, but also for us. And of course, besides the symbolic weight and the ceremonial component of the decision to award Professor Preslenova with this highest academic distinction, it is also another opportunity to further strengthen our academic research and, in general, scientific relations with eminent and distinguished scientists from neighboring countries, so that in synergy with them, we can promote not only the research of history and culture, but also the mutual understanding and cooperation of the Balkan peoples on both sides of the border, all the more so since, with our Bulgarian neighbors, we now belong not only to the wider Balkan region, but also to the European Union. With these thoughts, which on the whole also present the underlying reasoning for the decision to receive Professor Rumiana Ilieva Preslenova as an honorary member into the academic family of the Department of History and Ethnology, and therefore of the School of Classics and Humanities, I want to close by again welcoming you, dear colleague. On behalf of all of us, I wish you unshakable health, immense mental strength, and boundless research energy, so that as an ardent athlete of the mind and science, you will always distinguish yourself in the arena of academic achievements. I wish to extend to you my very warmest welcome.
Παρακαλείται ο πρόεδρος του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, καθηγητής κύριος Γεώργιος Τσιγάρας, να προσφωνήσει την τιμόμενη.
The head of the Department of History and Ethnology, Professor Georgios Tsigaras, is kindly requested to address a welcome speech.
Ανοσιολογιότατε εκπρόσωπε του Σεβασμιωτάτου Μητροπολίτου Μαρονίας και Κομοτηνής κυρίου Παντελεήμονος, κύριε πρόξενε, κύριε κοσμήτορα της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών, sehr geehrte und liebe Frau Professor Dr. Rumiana Preslenova, κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί φοιτητές, κυρίες και κύριοι. Όταν το Πανεπιστήμιο τιμά μετά από αυστηρή επιλογή έναν επιστήμονα, απονέμοντάς του την ανώτατη διάκριση του επίτιμου διδάκτορα, προβαίνει και με τον τρόπο αυτό σε μια ακαδημαϊκή πράξη που εκφράζει τη σχέση, τον διάλογο του Ιδρύματος με το σύνολο της ακαδημαϊκής κοινότητας. Με τις τελετές αυτές, εκτός από την αναγνώριση του επιστημονικού έργου και του ακαδημαϊκού ήθους των τιμωμένων, το Πανεπιστήμιο, οι σχολές και τα τμήματα δεν πάβουν να δηλώνουν μέσω μιας ευφρόσινης πνευματικής εορτής και την εξωστρέφειά τους. Πράγματι, η σημερινή ημέρα είναι ιδιαίτερη για το Τμήμα Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, γιατί τιμάται η καθηγήτρια Ρουμιάνα Ηλίεβα Πρεσλένοβα, Διευθύντρια του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών του Θρακολογικού Κέντρου της Βουλγαρικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών, μια εκ των πλέον επιφανών ιστορικών της Βουλγαρίας, γνωστής όχι μόνο στη χώρα της και στα Βαλκάνια, αλλά και στον διεθνή, γερμανόφωνο και αγγλόφωνο επιστημονικό χώρο. Με την απόψινή αναγόρευση της κυρίας Πρεσλένοβα σε επίτιμη διδάκτορα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, τιμάται μια ερευνήτρια της Βαλκανικής Ιστορίας, η οποία στο έργο της διερευνά και προβάλλει την κοινή ιστορική πορεία και συχνά την τραγική μοίρα των λαών της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης. Η κυρία Πρεσλένοβα προβάλλει στο έργο της τα κοινά πολιτιστικά στοιχεία που χαρακτηρίζουν τους λαούς των Βαλκανίων, τονίζοντας με τον τρόπο αυτό την ανάγκη υπέρβασης των παλαιών ανταγωνισμών και αντιπαραθέσεων, και αυτό το στοιχείο θεωρώ ιδιαίτερα σημαντικό και εξόχως πρωτοπόρο για την ευρύτερη περιοχή μας. Για αυτούς τους λόγους είμαι πεπισμένος ότι η απόψινή αναγόρευση είναι πράγματι μια ευφρόσινη πνευματική εορτή για το Τμήμα Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, με την οποία, εκτός από τον εορταστικό χαρακτήρα, δηλώνεται και η εξωστρέφεια του τμήματός μας. Θα πρέπει με έμφαση να επισημάνω ότι την κυρία Πρεσλένοβα γνώρισα πριν από μερικά χρόνια κατά τη διάρκεια ενός σημαντικού τριήμερου συνεδρίου για τις ελληνοβουλγαρικές σχέσεις, το οποίο οργάνωσε η εκλεκτή συνάδελφος Ελεονόρα Ναξίδου, αναπληρώτρια καθηγήτρια νεότερης και σύγχρονης ιστορίας της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης στο τμήμα μας. Το συνέδριο αυτό ήταν σημαντικό όχι μόνο για τα επιστημονικά και ερευνητικά στοιχεία που ανακοινώθηκαν και για τα συμπεράσματά του, αλλά γιατί ήταν και ένα γεγονός, ένα τεκμήριο, θα το τονίσω πάλι, της εξωστρέφειας του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας. Στο συνέδριο αυτό, καθοριστική ήταν η παρουσία και οι παρεμβάσεις της κυρίας Πρεσλένοβα. Από την παρουσία της στο συνέδριο και διαβάζοντας αργότερα το εν γέννη συγγραφικό της έργο στα γερμανικά, διαπίστωσα τα στοιχεία εκείνα που διακρίνουν και κυριαρχούν στη σκέψη και στην έρευνά της. Στην τριήμερη συναναστροφή μας στο συνέδριο, διέκρινα την ευρύτητα του πνεύματός της, την υφαλιότητα της σκέψης της και την ευθυκρισία της. Κατακλείοντας, αισθάνομαι την ανάγκη να τονίσω ότι τιμούμε σήμερα μια επιστήμονα, βασική επιδίωξη της οποίας στη θητεία της στην έρευνα είναι η γνώση του παρελθόντος, την οποία θεωρεί ως το μόνο αντίδοτο, ως την απαραίτητη προϋπόθεση για τον περιορισμό της βαναυσότητας του απρόπτου. Και στην ιστορία της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης έχουμε βιώσει πολλές φορές τις συνέπειες αυτής της βαναυσότητας. Γιατί όλοι μας συμφωνούμε ότι χωρίς παρελθόν δεν υπάρχει και μέλλον. Και τα Βαλκάνια έχουν μεγάλο παρελθόν και πιστεύω και ευίωνο μέλλον. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Your Excellency, on behalf of His Eminence, illustrious Dean of the School of Classics and Humanities, Professor Emanuil Varvounis, distinguished colleagues and students, ladies and gentlemen, when, after a rigorous selection process, the university honors and scientists by awarding them the highest distinction of an honorary doctorate, in this way, it also performs an academic act which conveys its relations, the dialogue of the institution with the entire academic community. Through such ceremonies, besides bestowing well-deserved recognition on the honoree for their outstanding scientific work and academic ethos, the university, schools and departments are in essence declaring, through these joyous academic celebrations, their openness and visibility. Indeed, today is a special day for the Department of History and Ethnology because it honors Professor Rumiana Ilieva Preslenova, Director of the Institute of Balkan Studies and the Center for Thrakology of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, who is one of Bulgaria's most eminent historians, known not only in her country and in the Balkans, but in the international German and English-speaking scientific world as well. Tonight's auspicious occasion, where Professor Preslenova is made an honorary doctor of the Department of History and Ethnology, we honor a leading researcher in Balkan history who, through her work, explores and reveals the common historical root and often tragic fate of the peoples of Southeastern Europe. In her work, Professor Preslenova highlights the common cultural elements which characterize the peoples of the Balkans, and in so doing lays emphasis on the pressing necessity that the old rivalries and conflicts be surmounted. I must say that I personally find this aspect of her work of the utmost importance and extremely forward-thinking for our wider region. It is for these reasons that I am convinced that tonight's conferment is indeed a joyous cultural celebration for the Department of History and Ethnology, with which, in addition to the festive character, the extroversion of our department is clearly asserted. I should point out that I met Professor Preslenova a few years ago during a successful 3-day conference on Greek-Bulgarian relations, which was organized by my esteemed colleague Eleonora Naxidou, Associate Professor of Modern and Contemporary History of Southeastern Europe in our department. Besides the stimulating scientific and research information that was presented, this conference was significant because, as an event, it was a testament to the extroversion and visibility of the Department of History and Ethnology. Professor Preslenova's presence and interventions at the conference were decisive. And it was, in fact, here that I initially, and of course later, through her extensive written work, that I became acquainted with those aspects which distinguish and dominate her thinking and research. During these 3 days of the conference, where I had the opportunity to fraternize with Professor Preslenova, I saw and understood the breadth of her intellect, the clarity of her thinking, and the soundness of her judgment. In closing, I feel the need to stress the fact that tonight we are honoring a scientist whose main pursuit in her dedication to research is knowledge of the past, which she deems to be the only antidote, the imperative prerequisite to limiting the cruelty of the unforeseen. And in the history of Southeastern Europe, we have experienced the painful repercussions of this cruelty many times, because I'm sure we all agree that without a past, there cannot be a future. The Balkans have a great past and, I believe, an auspicious future.
Παρακαλείται η αναπληρώτρια καθηγήτρια του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, κυρία Ελεονόρα Αναξίδου, να εκφωνήσει τον έπαινο της τιμόμενης.
The Associate Professor of the Department of History and Ethnology, Eleonora Anaxidou, is kindly requested to deliver the laudatio in honor of Professor Rumiana Preslenova.
Πανουσιολογιότατε εκπρόσωπε του Μητροπολίτη Μαρονίας και Κομοτηνής, κύριε Πρόξενε, κύριε Κοσμήτορα, κύριε Πρόεδρε του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι και φοιτητές, κυρίες και κύριοι. Το τιμόμενο πρόσωπο της σημερινής τελετής που διοργανώνει το Τμήμα Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας του Δημοκρατίου Πανεπιστημίου Θράκης είναι η καθηγήτρια κυρία Ρουμιάννα Ηλίεβα Πρεσλένοβα, Διευθύντρια του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών και Κέντρου Θρακολογίας της Βουλγαρικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών, μία εξέχουσα ακαδημαϊκός στο πεδίο των σπουδών της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης. Πρόκειται για μία ιδιαίτερα καταξιωμένη επιστήμονα, όχι μόνο στη Βουλγαρία, αλλά και πανευρωπαϊκά, η οποία χαίρει μεγάλης εκτίμησης στον επιστημονικό κλάδο με τον οποίο ασχολείται, όχι μόνο στη χώρα της, αλλά και διεθνώς, όπως προκύπτει από το πλούσιο και πρωτότυπο ερευνητικό και συγγραφικό της έργο, στο οποίο θα αναφερθούμε στη συνέχεια. Επιπρόσθετα, η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα, τόσο ως επιστήμονας, όσο και από τη διευθυντική θέση που κατέχει στη Βουλγαρική Ακαδημία Επιστημών, δείχνει μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον και συμμετέχει σε πρωτοβουλίες για τη δημιουργία επαφών και την προώθηση των επιστημονικών σχέσεων μεταξύ Ελλάδας και Βουλγαρίας και ειδικότερα του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών, στο οποίο προείσταται, με το Δημοκρίτιο Πανεπιστήμιο. Οι σχέσεις αυτές επισφραγίστηκαν μάλιστα το 2015 με την υπογραφή πρωτοκόλου συνεργασίας.
First of all, I would like to say it is a great privilege for me to deliver the laudatio for our honored guest, Professor Rumiana Ilieva Preslenova, Director of the Institute of Balkan Studies and Center for Thrakology of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, an eminent academic in the field of Southeastern European Studies, in tonight's honorary doctorate conferment ceremony organized by the Department of History and Ethnology of the Democratic University of Thrace. Professor Preslenova, a distinguished scientist in Bulgaria and throughout Europe, is highly respected in her chosen field and rightly enjoys national and international acclaim for her rich and original work in both research and written publications, which will be referred to further on. From the position she holds, both as a scientist and an administrator at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, Professor Preslenova always shows great interest and takes active participation in initiatives to establish contacts and promote scientific relations between Greece and Bulgaria in general and the Institute of Balkan Studies, which she heads, and our Department of History and Ethnology of the Democritus University in particular. In fact, these relations were sealed in 2015 with the signing of a protocol of cooperation.
Σε αυτό το πλαίσιο, η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα επισκέφτηκε την Κομοτηνή το 2018 και έλαβε μέρος στο Διεθνές Επιστημονικό Συνέδριο Greece and Bulgaria, Parallels and Intersections in History and Culture, το οποίο διοργανώθηκε από το τμήμα μας με μεγάλη επιτυχία και με την υποστήριξη της τιμόμενης. Επίσης, η τιμόμενη με την ιδιότητά της ως Διευθύντριας του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών και Κέντρου Θρακολογίας ενέκρινε την ένταξη της δημοσίευσης του τόμου των πρακτικών του συνεδρίου στο εκδοτικό πρόγραμμα του Ινστιτούτου, τόμος ο οποίος εκδόθηκε στην Σόφια το 2021.
Within this context, Professor Preslenova visited Komotini in 2018 and took part in the International Scientific Conference, Greece and Bulgaria, Parallels and Intersection in History and Culture, which was organized by our department with a resounding success and with the wholehearted support of our distinguished guest. And it was thanks to her capacity as director of the Institute of Balkan Studies and Center for Thrakology that the publication of the conference proceedings volume was approved and included in the Institute's publishing program, which was accomplished in Sofia in 2021.
Η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα αποφοίτησε από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Σόφιας Φέτη Κλίμεντ Όχριτσκι, όπου στη συνέχεια πραγματοποίησε μεταπτυχιακές σπουδές στη γερμανική γλώσσα και κατόπιν στην ιστορία και τη θεωρία του πολιτισμού. Κατόπιν έκανε διδακτορικό στην ιστορία στο Ινστιτούτο Βαλκανικών Σπουδών της Βουλγαρικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών, όπου και κατέλαβε θέση καθηγήτριας. Συγχρόνως, έλαβε πολλές υποτροφίες και συνεργάστηκε με πολλά ευρωπαϊκά πανεπιστήμια.
Allow me now to give a very brief overview of our honored guest's biographical information. Professor Preslenova graduated from the University of Sofia Sveti Kliment Ohridsky, where she then carried out postgraduate studies in the German language and then in the history and theory of culture. She went on to earn a PhD in history from the Institute of Balkan Studies, Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, where she subsequently held a professorship. At the same time, she received many scholarships and collaborated with many European universities, such as
το Freie Universität Berlin, το Central European University στη Βουδαπέστη, το Karl Franzens Universität Graz, το Universität Wien, το Charles University Prague και το London School of Economics and Political Science. Συνεργάστηκε επίσης ως υπότροφος σε πολλές ακαδημίες επιστημών και επιστημονικά Ινστιτούτα.
the Freie Universität. She has also collaborated as a fellow with several science academies and scientific institutes, including
Österreichische Akademie der Wissenschaften Wien, Österreichisches Ost- und Südosteuropa-Institut Wien, Südostinstitut München, British Academy London and the Institute für die Wissenschaften von Menschen Wien. Η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα είναι μέλος στα διοικητικά συμβούλια διαφόρων διεθνών επιστημονικών εταιριών, όπως η Association Internationale d'études du Sud-Est Européen, καθώς και μέλος σε εκδοτικές επιτροπές διεθνών επιστημονικών περιοδικών, όπως το Etude Balkanique Σόφια και το Hyperborea Βουκουρέστη. Η τιμόμενη έχει επίσης πολύπλευρη ερευνητική δραστηριότητα. Έχει συμμετάσχει σε πάρα πολλά διεθνή επιστημονικά προγράμματα, είτε ως συντονίστρια είτε ως μέλος. Ενδεικτικά αναφέρουμε μερικά από τα προγράμματα τα οποία διευθύνει.
Another important facet of our honored guest's work is her considerable research activity. She has participated in many international scientific programs, either as a coordinator or as a member, and I indicatively refer to some of the programs which she directs.
Development of the Bulgarian studies abroad. Empire of consuls, consulship, sovereignty, and empire in the long 19th century. Visual culture, piety and propaganda, transfer and reception of Russian religious art in the Balkans and the Eastern Mediterranean. Cultural historical heritage, national memory and social development. Between Vienna and Constantinople, nationalism in Central and Southeast Europe after the dissolution of the Habsburg and the Ottoman empires. Κατά την πολυετή ακαδημαϊκή της καριέρα, η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα έχει συμβάλει στην ανάπτυξη των βαλκανικών σπουδών με πάρα πολλές δημοσιεύσεις μονογραφιών, κεφαλαίων σε συλλογικούς τόμους και άρθρων, καθώς και με την επιμέλεια συλλογικών τόμων, δημοσιεύσεις που είναι πρωτότυπες και προωθούν τον επιστημονικό διάλογο στα πεδία της ιστορίας και του πολιτισμού της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης. Ενδεικτικά αναφέρουμε τις μονογραφίες της σχετικά με τις ανώτατες σπουδές των Βουλγάρων στην Αυστρο-Ουγγαρία και με τις σχέσεις της Αυστρο-Ουγγαρίας με τα Βαλκάνια στα βουλγαρικά, καθώς και τις πρόσφατες επιμέλειες τόμων «Πόλεις στα Βαλκάνια», «Χώρος, πρόσωπα, αναμνήσεις» στα αγγλικά και «Ο εθνικισμός στα Βαλκάνια τον 20ο αιώνα» στα βουλγαρικά.
Throughout her extensive academic career, Professor Preslenova has contributed greatly to the development of Balkan studies through her numerous publications of monographs, chapters in collective volumes and articles, as well as editing collective volumes and original publications that promote scholarly dialogue in the fields of history and the culture of Southeast Europe. Indicatively, I refer to her monographs on the higher education of Bulgarians in Austria-Hungary, 1879-1918, and on the relations between Austria-Hungary and the Balkans, both written in Bulgarian. Also, she recently edited the volumes Cities in the Balkans, Spaces, Faces, Memories in English, and Nationalism in Balkans in the 19th century in Bulgarian.
Επιπρόσθετα, η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα έχει γράψει πάνω από 60 άρθρα και κεφάλαια σε συλλογικούς τόμους στα βουλγαρικά, στα αγγλικά και στα γερμανικά. Οι δημοσιεύσεις αυτές, εκτός από τη σχέση των Βαλκανίων και ειδικότερα και της Βουλγαρίας με την Αυστρο-Ουγγαρία, εστιάζουν σε θεματικές όπως ο εθνικισμός και τα εθνικά δίκτυα στην Νοτιοανατολική Ευρώπη, οι εθνικές ταυτότητες, οι σχέσεις μεταξύ των βαλκανικών εθνικών κρατών, στις οποίες εντάσσονται και οι σχέσεις Ελλάδας-Βουλγαρίας, οι σχέσεις των Βαλκανίων με τη Ρωσία, η κοινωνία και η πολιτισμική κληρονομιά στα Βαλκάνια, η κοινωνικο-οικονομική ανάπτυξη των Βαλκανικών πόλεων, η φυσιογνωμία της ανώτατης εκπαίδευσης στα Βαλκάνια, η πορεία των Βαλκανίων προς την ευρωπαϊκότητα και την ευρωπαϊκή ενσωμάτωση.
Additionally, Professor Preslenova has written over 60 articles and chapters in collective volumes in Bulgarian, English, and German. Besides the relations of the Balkans, and in particular Bulgarian, Austria-Hungary, these publications focus on topics such as nationalism and national networks in Southeast Europe, national identities, relations between the Balkan nation states, which include the relations between Greece and Bulgaria, the relations between the Balkans and Russia, society and cultural heritage in the Balkans, the socio-economic development of Balkan cities, the profile of higher education in the Balkans, and the path of the Balkans towards Europeanness and European integration.
Αναφέρουμε μερικούς τίτλους από τις αγγλικές δημοσιεύσεις. European Influence and Reaction, Economics and Culture, The Ottoman Balkans and Nation Building, Uniting the Balkans, Common Desires and First Initiatives in the Interwar Period, Economic Culture and Economic Policy in Southeastern Europe during the 19th century, The Close and the Distant Balkans, Building Up Identities in the Context of Economic Development, 1978-1912. Η διεθνής παρουσία και η επιστημονική υπόλοιψη της καθηγήτριας Πρεσλένοβα αποδεικνύονται επίσης και από τη συμμετοχή της σε πάνω από 60 διεθνή επιστημονικά συνέδρια, καθώς και από τη διδασκαλία της σε σεμινάρια στην Αυστρία και τη Γερμανία. Επιπλέον, Η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα είναι μια πολύ επιτυχημένη διευθύντρια στο Ινστιτούτο Βαλκανικών Σπουδών και Κέντρο Θρακολογίας, όπως αποδεικνύεται τόσο από τα πεπραγμένα της πρώτης θητείας της, όσο και από το γεγονός ότι οι συνάδελφοί της εμπιστεύτηκαν και δεύτερη θητεία. Από τη διευθυντική της θέση, η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα αναλαμβάνει πρωτοβουλίες για την ανάπτυξη και την αύξηση του κύρους του Ινστιτούτου, μέσω των οποίων διευρύνονται οι επιστημονικές του συνεργασίες με άλλα ιδρύματα και πανεπιστήμια της Βουλγαρίας, αλλά και του εξωτερικού. Επίσης, χάρη σε δικές της ενέργειες, το Ινστιτούτο έλαβε χρηματοδότηση για την εκπόνηση δικών του ερευνητικών προγραμμάτων, ενώ εντάχθηκε σε άλλα ως εταίρος.
Professor Preslenova's prominent international presence and well-established scientific reputation is also demonstrated by her constructive participation in over 60 international scientific conferences, as well as by her teaching at seminars in Austria and Germany. Moreover, Professor Preslenova has been and continues to be a very successful director of the Institute of Balkan Studies and Center for Thrakology, as evidenced on the one hand by her notable achievements during her first term in office, and on the other by the fact that her colleagues have entrusted her with a second term. From her administrative position, Professor Preslenova has undertaken important initiatives for the expansion of the Institute's scientific collaborations with other institutions and universities in both Bulgaria and abroad, which have contributed to the development and engagement of its prestige. In fact, it was on account of her decisive actions that the Institute received funding to develop research programs of its own, while also becoming a partner in others.
Συγχρόνως όμως, η καθηγήτρια Πρεσλένοβα ξεχωρίζει και ως προσωπικότητα. Τη διακρίνουν το ακαδημαϊκό ήθος, η σεμνότητα και η σοβαρότητα, όπως έχω διαπιστώσει τόσο από την προσωπική μου γνωριμία μαζί της σε διάφορα συνέδρια, όσο και από τις μαρτυρίες των συνεργατών της. Πρόκειται για μια ακαδημαϊκό με επιστημονική ευρύτητα, ιδιαίτερα παραγωγική με ποιοτικό έργο, μια ακαδημαϊκό η οποία διαθέτει όλες τις αρετές και ικανότητες ενός όριμου και καταξιωμένου επιστήμονα και ερευνητή.
At the same time, Professor Preslenova has a truly remarkable personality with a pleasant disposition and strength of character. She has distinguished herself for her academic ethos, for which her modesty and seriousness do her credit, qualities that I have witnessed from my personal acquaintance with her at various conferences, as well as from the testimonies of her colleagues. Professor Preslenova is an academic with a wealth of scientific knowledge, who is highly productive with outstanding quality and mature work. In fact, one would surely say that she is an academic whose qualities and virtues make her a distinguished scientist and accomplished researcher.
Δεν μένει λοιπόν παρά να συγχαρώ την τιμόμενη και να εκφράσω την ιδιαίτερη χαρά και ικανοποίηση και μου προσωπικά αλλά και όλων των συναδέλφων μου του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας που η καθηγήτρια Ρουμιάνα Ηλίεβα Πρεσλένοβα συμπεριλαμβάνεται από σήμερα στους επίτιμους διδάκτορες του τμήματός μας και να της ευχηθώ να συνεχίσει να εργάζεται με τον ίδιο ζήλο για την επιστήμη και για την προβολή της βαλκανικής ιστορίας και του πολιτισμού, καθώς και για τη σύσφυξη των ελληνοβουλγαρικών επιστημονικών σχέσεων.
In closing, I would like to again recognize this special celebratory occasion and to say, Professor Rumiana Ilieva Preslenova, on behalf of me and my colleagues, we wish you to express our heartfelt congratulations on your receiving an honorary doctorate from the Department of History and Ethnology. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and may you continue to work with the same zeal and vigor that you have shown all these years for scientific and academic excellence, for the promotion of Balkan history and culture, and for the strengthening of Greek-Bulgarian scientific relations.
Παρακαλείται ο κοσμήτορας της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών, καθηγητής κύριος Εμμανουήλ Βαρβούνης, να περιενδύσει την τιμόμενη με την Τίβενο και να της επιδώσει τα διάσημα και τις μεμβράνες του ψηφίσματος, της αναγόρευσης και του διδακτορικού διπλώματος.
Ελληνική Δημοκρατία. Δημοκρίτιων Πανεπιστήμιων Θράκης. Ψήφισμα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας. Τύχη αγαθή, πριτανεύοντος εν το Δημοκρατίο Πανεπιστημίο Θράκης, Φωτίου Παντελή Μάρη, προεδρεύοντος του εν Κομωτινή Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, Γεωργίου Χρήστου Τσιγάρα, τη εισηγήση της αναπληρωτρίας καθηγητρίας νεότερης και σύγχρονης ιστορίας της Νοτιοανατολικής Ευρώπης Ελεονόρας Ναξίδου, του καθηγητού της Ιστορίας της Βυζαντινής και Μεταβυζαντινής Τέχνης Γεωργίου Τσιγάρα και του αναπληρωτού καθηγητού Βυζαντινής και Μεταβυζαντινής Γραμματείας Ελληνικής Παλαιογραφίας Δημοσθένη Στρατηγοπούλου, έδοξε το τμήματι την κυρία Ρουμιάνα Πρεσλένοβα, γυναίκα επιφανή παγκοσμίως, πολλά τότε πανεπιστημίο και την παιδεία προσενεγκούσασαν και την επιστήμη της ιστορίας επαξίως τιμήσασαν, επενέσεται και του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας διδάκτορα επίτιμον ανακηρύξε, το δε ψήφισμα τόδε εν μευράνη αναγράψε και τον του Τμήματος Πρόεδρον δημοσία εν την αιθούση τη μεγάλη αναγνώντα επιδούνε αυτή, εν ή αν ημέρα η ανακήρυξης γέννηται. Εν κομωτινή μηνός Νοεμβρίου, 30 έτη της χιλιοστό και 22 Δευτέρο, ο του Τμήματος Πρόεδρος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας Γεώργιος Χρήστου Τσιγάρας. Ελληνική Δημοκρατία. Δημοκρίτιων Πανεπιστήμιων Θράκης, Σχολή Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών. Αναγόρευσης. Επειδή το Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας τμήμα του Δημοκρατίου Πανεπιστημίου Θράκης, την κυρία Ρουμιάνα Πρεσλένοβα, καθηγητρία Βαλκανικής Ιστορίας και διευθύντρια του Ινστιτούτου Βαλκανικών Σπουδών και Κέντρου Θρακολογίας της Βουλγαρικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών, αξία απέφυνε του επιτήμου διδακτορικού αξιώματος, ο δε πρίτανης τη τούτου γνώμη επινέβη, διατάφτα εγώ, Γεώργιος Χρήστου Τσιγάρας, καθηγητής της Ιστορίας της Βυζαντινής και Μεταβυζαντινής Τέχνης, νυν δε του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας Πρόεδρος, χρώμενος στη δυνάμει, ειν παρά των πανεπιστημιακών νόμων και του Τμήματος Έχω Λαβών, την κυρία Ρουμιάνα Πρεσλένοβα, επίτιμον διδάκτορα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών του Δημοκρατίου Πανεπιστημίου Θράκης, δημοσία αναγορεύω και πάσας τας προνομίας τας το πανεπιστημιακό τούτο αξιώματι παρεπομένας απονέμω, εν κομωτινή μηνός Μαρτίου 29 έτη της χιλιοστό και 23ο, ο πρίτανης Φώτιος Παντελή Μάρης καθηγητής, ο πρόεδρος Γεώργιος Χρήστου Τσιγάρας καθηγητής. Ελληνική Δημοκρατία. Δημοκρίτιων Πανεπιστήμιων Θράκης. Σχολή Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών. Δίπλωμα. Πριτανεύοντος εν το Δημοκρατίο Πανεπιστημίο Θράκης Φωτίου Παντελή Μάρη, καθηγητού του Τμήματος Πολιτικών Μηχανικών της Πολυτεχνικής Σχολής, Γεώργιος Χρήστου Τσιγάρας, καθηγητής Ιστορίας της Βυζαντινής και Μεταβυζαντινής Τέχνης, επιδέ του παρόντος του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας Πρόεδρος, την κυρία Ρουμιάνα Πρεσλένοβα, αποδόγματος ομοθήμου του Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας Τμήματος, εις τους επιτήμους διδάκτορας ενέκρινε του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών. Εν κομωτινή μηνός Μαρτίου 29η έτη της χιλιοστό και 23ο. Ο πρίτανης Φώτιος Παντελή Μάρης καθηγητής, ο πρόεδρος Γεώργιος Χρήστου Τσιγάρας καθηγητής.
Παρακαλείται τώρα ο πρίτανης κοσμήτωρος Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών καθηγητής κύριος Εμμανουήλ Βαρβούνης να περιενδύσει την τιμόμενη με την Τίβενο και να της επιδώσει τα διάσημα και τις μεμβράνες του ψηφίσματος, της αναγόρευσης και του διδακτορικού διπλώματος.
The Dean of the School of Classics and Humanities and the head of the Department of History and Ethnology are kindly requested to present to the honoris causa the Metal School and presents.
Παρακαλείται η επίτιμη διδάκτορας, καθηγήτρια κυρία Ρουμιάνα Πρεσλένοβα, να έρθει στο βήμα και να εκφωνήσει ομιλία με θέμα Women in Science.
The Doctor Honoris Causa, Professor Rumiana Preslenova, is kindly requested to deliver a speech on the topic Women in Science.
Dear Professor Varvuni, Dean of the School of Classics and Humanities of Democritus University of Thrace, dear Professor Tsigaras, Head of the Department of History and Ethnology of Democritus University of Thrace, dear Professor Nora Naxidou, dear colleagues, guests, dear students. It is an honor to be here with you today. As academics, we have dedicated our life to the pursuit of knowledge and the betterment of our world through education and research. We come from different backgrounds, but we are united by a common cause in a world that often seems divided and polarized. It is heartening to come together here to share ideas and insights, to learn from one another, and to build bridges of understanding and cooperation. As scholars, we have a special responsibility to use our knowledge and expertise for the greater good. We must be agents of positive change in our communities and in the Balkans. It is relevant to talk about women in science exactly in Greece, the homeland of Athena, the deity of knowledge, wisdom, crafts, civilization, and justice, in whose honor the Parthenon was built on the Acropolis of Athens. But not only. Katerina Bobota reminds us of some historical persons in ancient Greece as well. Among them is Hypatia of Alexandria, the earliest and most well-known woman mathematician and philosopher of the 4th century BC. Hypatia's research focused on math, astronomy, and engineering, while she also chaired the Neoplatonic School of Alexandria. Another one is Theano of Croton, considered student and possibly wife of Pythagoras of Samos, the Greek philosopher who made important developments in math, astronomy, and the theory of music. Theano was teaching astronomy and math at the schools of Pythagoras and Croton. The Pythagorean view of the golden section, as well as the theory of numbers, is attributed to Theano. A math teacher who introduced Pythagoras to the principles of geometry and arithmetic was also a woman, Themistoclea. Pythagoras was inspired by her moral principles, which he adopted, a fact that made him to accept women in his school. Themistoclea is also considered one of the first European philosophers, though none of her works seem to have survived. With the rise of the Roman Empire, the role of Greek women socially and institutionally deteriorated. For centuries, between the antiquity and modernity, science remained a privilege for almost only men. It took time until this field became accessible for women again. In this period, most families believed that girls did not need formal education and that their role was to be wives and mothers. After the Enlightenment, the 19th century brought several important social changes without which modern society would not be the same. Especially important among them, along with technological progress, is the democratization of education, the transformation of science from a strictly elitist to a more widely accessible activity, and the struggle of women for equality. All three novelties aimed to promote a fundamental social value, the human, regardless of their social origin and gender. Some bright minds, such as Friedrich von Schlegel and John Stuart Mill, considered that the exclusion of women from public activities did not support the advancement of society. Many men and women realized that the education of girls was an integral part of the modernization. The recognition of the importance of women was linked to the growing need for teachers, for schools that were rapidly increasing in number. Within a short time, along with charity institutions, women established social foundations focusing on education and culture and became active members of social life. Nevertheless, girls started their primary education on equal terms with boys, to be later excluded from actual secondary education and from university studies. Such exclusion was a true disadvantage for women because it deepened the cultural gap separating them from men within societies where culture and knowledge were considered primary values. In the Ottoman Empire, in the early 19th century, Christians took important steps towards secular education. For the rising nations, schools have been a fundamental component of their efforts to gain independence. This caused the growing influence of the civil authorities, represented by the economically most active strata, both in the Balkans and in the diaspora. The finance of schools was provided by foundations, community incomes, church incomes, private donations, most of all by wealthy diaspora Greeks and Bulgarians, and by foreign missionaries. The education of Greek girls was included even in the agenda of the Patriarchate of Constantinople since the 1870s, after a number of girls' schools were already operating in Smyrna, in Athens, in Constantinople, in Thessaloniki, in Mytilene, and in Philippopolis, then in the Ottoman Empire. In Bulgarian, the first private girls' high schools opened in Stara Zagora, Gabrovo, Plovdiv, Kazanlak, Svishtov, Russe, Thessaloniki, between 1840s and 1860s. They were founded and maintained most often by women. It was in 1890s that the University of Athens accepted its first female student. She was Ioanna Stefanopouli, who enrolled in the Department of Philology. The percentage of female students at the University of Athens grew steadily, from a mere 0.1% at the end of the 19th century. The percentage approached 16% in 1938. How was it possible? Some brave women started pleading for equal rights. Kalliroi Paren, Greek feminist, journalist, novelist, and educator, headmistress of girls' schools in Russia and in the Balkans in the late 19th and early 20th century, launched the feminist movement in Greece with the founding of the newspapers Ephemeris ton Kyrion, Ladies' Journal, in 1887. Her main aim was to awaken women and lead them towards self-awareness. The main goal for Paren was for women to have access to all educational levels. She founded the Union for the Emancipation of Women, the Union of Greek Women, and the Lyceum of Greek Women. Her efforts led to laws concerning the protection of working women and children, the admission of women to the University and the Polytechnic of Athens. In 1936, her achievements in advancing the status of women were recognized by the Greek Academy, which awarded her with the Golden Cross of the Savior. The choice of a woman to attend university and pursue an academic career was driven by personal desire. However, at least in the initial years, the consent and support of their families were indispensable. Besides the necessary financial support, the first female university students needed moral support. In 1897, almost 20 years after the liberation, Anna Karima, a writer, publicist, and translator, did the same in Bulgaria. She founded the Women's Educational Society Consciousness Сознание, which sent a petition to the National Assembly for the admission of women to university education. This claim was accepted in 1901. Women's aim at scientific career was inspired by personalities such as Maria Skłodowska-Curie, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Physics 1903 and Chemistry 1911. She is the only scientist ever to have received the Nobel Prize in two different scientific fields, the first female professor at the University of Paris and the first woman head of the Radium Institute in Paris, founded for her in 1909 by the University of Paris and the Institut Pasteur. A similar profile has Elisaveta Kara-Mikhailova, the first professor of radioactivity and nuclear spectroscopy, the first woman professor of physics in Bulgaria in 1939, founder of the Department of Atomic Physics at Sofia University and the Laboratory of Radioactivity at the Institute of Physics at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Before starting her career in Bulgaria, she worked at the Institute for Radium Research in Vienna and the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. Current successors of these outstanding women gathered in a platform named Greek Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics, and Medicine, which seeks to highlight and support the work of Greek women in these and all related fields. This is a sign that women in science feel that support is still needed. These and many other less known women were paving our way to the right to be scholars and scientists, which goes through access to higher education. While remaining dominant politically and economically, men generally accept the departure of many women from their limited role as wives and mothers. This transition took decades. In our time, an indisputable expression of the changed attitude towards women is the Charter of Fundamental Rights of Citizens of the European Union, adopted at the Nice summit in 2000. It explicitly pointed out that the principle of equality does not prevent specific advantage measures in favor of the underrepresented gender from being maintained or adopted. It was further developed by the European Parliament resolution of 27 September 2007 on equality between women and men in the European Union. Both documents create a framework for equal rights for men and women in the EU. The European Commission also adopted the Europe 2020 guidelines for employment and the European Pact for Gender Equality 2011-2020. A relative share of 40 to 60% of women is taken as a criterion for balanced representativeness. Nowadays, in Bulgaria, the share of women in the public sector of science and higher education is 53%. The participation of women in Greece in research and development is revealed in a study by the National Documentation Center, which presents data and indicators on the position of women in academia, research, business, and in European and nationally funded projects. According to it, in 2019, 44 of the total staff employed in research and development in Greece are women. Nowadays, women represent around 40% of all researchers in the higher education sector in Greece. To the extent that these shares are within the framework of equality criterion adopted by the EU, 40 to 60%, the participation of women and men in academia in Greece and Bulgaria is balanced. As a comparison, according to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, in June 2019, women worldwide have a share in science of an average of 30%. In Central and Eastern Europe, they are 39%. In North America and Western Europe, they are 33%. Let's look behind the numbers. A reason for self-confidence is also given by Bulgarian and Greek women who have been performing as successful scientists abroad for years. I will mention just few vivid examples. Dr. Vaso Episcopou, a developmental biologist and professor emeritus at the Faculty of Medicine, Department of Brain Sciences of Imperial College London. The physicist Asimina Arvanitaki, who works at Canada Perimeter Institute, which is considered to be the largest theoretic physics research center in the world. She was awarded the 2020 Cap Triumph Vogt Medal for her innovative experiments and contributions to subatomic physics. Since 1995, Professor Raina Fichorova, who graduated in medicine and specialized in Bulgaria, is director of the Laboratory of Reproductive Biology at Harvard University. Professor Maria Todorova graduated in history at Sofia University and taught Balkan studies there. Since 1991, she was professor consecutively at the universities of Houston, Texas, Florida, and Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She is Doctor Honoris Causa of Sofia University and the Pantheon University in Athens. Not less respect deserve the Bulgarian and Greek women who remained in science in their own countries. They participate in the supranational academic community. Let me recall as an example Maria Negroponte de Livanis, a distinguished graduate of the Faculty of Law and Economics of the Aristotle University, State Doctor of the Sorbonne in Paris, the first woman university rector in Greece, Doctor Honoris Causa of numerous universities, including the Democritus University of Thrace, and honorary citizen of Komotini, among many other Greek and foreign prestigious awards. Another example is the renowned historian Olga Katsiardi-Hering, Professor Emeritus of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and our colleague, Professor Nadia Danova, who used to be professor at the Institute of Balkan Studies with Center of Trachology. On March 5, 2020, the European Commission published the new European Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025, which put the issue of equality between women and men back on the EU's political agenda in order to build a strong, social, and fair Europe. For many Europeans, this is still an unfulfilled goal of modernity worth fighting for. Without exaggeration, however, we can say that the current state of academia in Greece and Bulgaria is an example of significant equality of women and men based on individual qualities and achievements. In conclusion, women have made tremendous contributions to science throughout history, from ancient Greece to the present day. While significant progress has been made, there is still work to be done to ensure that women are able to fully participate in science. So let us continue to strive for excellence in our academic pursuits and never forget the human dimension of our work. And let us work together across borders and boundaries to create a better and prosperous world for future generations. Thank you.
Παρακαλούνται ο κοσμήτορας της Σχολής Κλασικών και Ανθρωπιστικών Σπουδών, καθηγητής κύριος Εμμανουήλ Βαρβούνης και ο πρόεδρος του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Εθνολογίας, καθηγητής κύριος Γεώργιος Τσιγάρας, να επιδώσουν στην τιμόμενη το μετάλλιο της σχολής και αναμνηστικά δώρα.
The Dean of the School of Classes and Humanities and the Head of the Department of History and Ethnology are kindly requested to present to the honoris causa the honorary plaque and present.
Άντε τώρα.